but I can't read, I can't write, I can't spell, and most of the time I don't know my left from my right.
Now here's the thing about me that's a secret that most people don't know. I'm borderline retarded, and I can't read. These books that you're recommending, Goethe. I would pick that up and I would be like, 10 minutes later, I'd be like, what's my favorite song? The ABCs?
I think we're kind of getting off topic. Can you name 10 books?
Keep going back to me. Can you?
Don't change.
No.
10 books.
You're changing the subject, actually.
10 books.
You're changing the subject,
okay,
actually.
3 books.
Okay. Well, the Game of Thrones series,
It's not a book.
Twilight series. It is a book.
Dress your age. Carrying a school bag on stage. What you do with a school bag on stage? You can't even read.
I have so many new clips and songs for that intro about not reading. I just haven't gotten around to it yet.
I can't wait till we get to reintroduce the show in like a month and a half. It's going to be great. But good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, campers. I hope you are all staying warm. Unless you live in Florida where it's like 85 degrees, well, then you can just take your sorry ass and go sunbathing or something.
I don't want to hear from these Florida people. I
really don't. Yeah, go enjoy your tax cuts and your 85-degree weather, and I guess Byron Donalds and Mr. Fishback can
go and enjoy your cocaine and gators.
Yeah. Make the most of it.
You're living in heaven. Why don't you shut up?
We are back for another episode of Do You Even Read, the only pro e-literacy podcast online. It is I, the Prudentialist, Mr. Matthew, joined by my wonderful co-host, but never a man to nickel and dime me, Mr. Dimes himself. How are you?
This is a good intro. I'm liking this. He came in with a pep in his step and some... I was going to say zest, but that means something different these days, doesn't it?
I guess it does.
Call someone zesty. You don't want to be that.
No.
Like, everyone, you'll notice this episode and mark the occasion by having mood rain. This is a good show. I love this shit.
This is one of your... If you think about all the things that have been going on in the weather, all the things going on in the news, I've noticed that people have been posting these aesthetically nice, pleasing places. It's like 10 out of 10 bleed out spot. This is your 10 bleed out podcast. So here we are. We've got the rain to match it.
The snow up here is up to my knees. It's been like a nonstop blizzard for a month. So rain is like I would love it to be pouring rain right now. I would love to be dying in the fucking rain. You ever think about it? Like, what would be your best bleed out spot?
I think the best bleed out spot for me would probably be like a nice nature trail park bench after a lively shootout with the IRS or some ethnic cartel.
I'd like it to be a hospital.
Well, to tie this all in with the book, I think most people think of a 10 out of 10 bleed out spot after some combative, heroic, violent use of force. If I'm bleeding out in a hospital, I mean that would be nice too.
I'd like to be bleeding out where there's help. Help me.
I'm dying. Someone.
I need some gauze.
He needs some milk is what he needs. Drink some OJ, wake up, you'll feel better in the morning.
For crying a cup, get me some medicine.
That may be the most Norm Macdonald delivery you've given. You're living up to being the Canadian co-host.
I mean, I don't know. Every year that goes by...
See, the problem is you can't go have a 10 out of 10 bleed out spot in a Canadian hospital. They'd be like, quick, drain more blood. He needs to die quicker.
Quick, kill this man immediately. Quick, kill this man bureaucratically.
Sir, I know you're losing consciousness, but you're still of a sound mind. So I know you've lost a pint of blood already, but if you could just sign this form so we can bleed out legally.
That's very good. Now dial up the Indian accent and like just
dial
up.
My goodness, this man is going to bleed out before he can sign the paperwork, sign the paperwork, sign the paperwork, sign the paperwork now. Yes. Welcome. You are going to die listening to another episode of Do You Even Read?
It almost sounded like you were getting into 80-year-old Schwarzenegger for a second.
So no, what's really terrible is that I want to say about 8 or 9 months ago, I was in I was in North Carolina and my fiance and I were off somewhere, and we had to get an Uber to go to this other thing, and we got picked up by an Indian guy, which immediately my heart was just like dashed into a million pieces. But then he was like, "Do you mind if I put on a podcast while I like drive to your like destination?"
No
I'm like, "Yeah, sure,
way.
whatever." And then what made it worse is like there was not just one guy who couldn't speak English to save his life with his little, elephant demon god on the dashboard. There were now 3 other broken English Indian accent voices talking about the hustle and how to get money. And it's just like, this is the worst. Like, I mean, America has a million problems that are totally worth criticizing. But I thought to myself, oh my gosh, we have exported like African American hustle culture to the subcontinent. And I feel like that has been teaching your worst enemy how to make automatic weapons. Like, this is terrible.
There's so much we can do with that. There's gold in them hills. Like at every fucking sentence of that, I'm like, we could spend 15 minutes on this. I'm thinking Indian.
Doesn't
Joe
it just
Rogan.
make you want to get violent?
Yeah. Well,
I'm trying so hard to segue into the damn book.
Yeah, in a way, allow us to reflect on this violence that we're contemplating. But also, like, I love Indian hustle culture, because at least with Black hustle culture, it does come across as silly, and they've over the many generations of being in America, they've absorbed at least a vague whiff of a Protestant work ethic, but with Indian, it's just scamming. It's just buy more Bluetooth headsets. You know what I mean? Like,
redeem more Google Play cards.
Yeah, it's just as bad as you
there
think.
There is
our
no
grifters
Max
are.
Weber in this at all. It's just straight up,
Max Web Preet.
Exactly.
Someone tuning in for the first time. I hear this is where they talk about like serious books, and they're like 2 smart guys. Hey, how about what if Max Weber was Indian? Fuck me.
This is how you filter the first like 5. This is how you filter the new guys. This is how we filter those like left-wing journos who want to do a hit piece.
This is how we filter for all the agents who are saying we need to sign a new show. We need something. We need to fill the gap left by Candace Owens when she left. We need a more reasonable Black woman. And of course, they're tuning in to Do You Even Read? Because
and they're sitting their white asses down and listening.
I'm something of a Black woman myself.
I'm something of exhausted myself.
We should get. Let me pull it up here.
Absolutely.
What am I even doing with my life? Okay. Here we go. What are we talking about? We're talking about a book that I had covered on my show, Blood Satellite. And have you read this book before, Prude?
I read it in college, and then that was the last time I picked up the text until about 6 months ago.
Yeah, so I would have covered it quite some time ago, but I found that I thought about it from time to time. And you and I have read a great many books, and I find it fascinating, the ones that really stick around, the ones that you wouldn't be expecting. In conversation, I've brought this up in articles on Vanguard's journal. I find just going back to it, not even necessarily quoting it, but just referring to the premise or a couple of the main arguments he makes. And I guess we'll just start there. When you read it recently, did it hold up? And did you experience that? Were you maybe thinking about it ever since you'd read it? Or was there some kind of lasting impact it left on you?
Not when I first read it. I had read this text as part of a curriculum required reading for, it was Europe in the 19th century, which was like an elective history course because I needed the credits. And it was a really enjoyable read alongside stuff from Burke and others covering a lot of these issues about violence and political revolution, because the 19th century in Europe is filled with them. And this book is no different, and commenting and examining the various kinds of revolutionary action that had taken place in France. And when I read it 6 months ago, when I first read it, I didn't really think much of it because there was only small passages, but then reading the whole thing, I was like, this is a really interesting interrogation of religion as well as sort of secular society inside France, between like Protestant and Catholic thinking, Christianity versus Marxism, and then the importance of all of Friedrich Nietzsche's writings and sort of the emphasis on mythology, responding to Ernst Renan's, What is a Nation, and his other commentaries as an anti-revolutionary thinker. So, I mean, violence itself being this sort of centerfold, hot, sexy topic for tonight, it is an interesting text because this is like hearkening back to the Industrial Revolution. And it's hearkening back to a time where like workers' guilds or cooperatives would, the purpose of a strike and what it means to, diminish power. But also how do we keep up this like lively, organic spirit of combativeness and violence? And it holds up, I think, in a lot of ways because as with all political contests, you either destroy your enemies entirely or you get them to severely capitulate for the sake of surviving. And a lot of that's still present in this book, especially when it comes to narrative and mythological focus. And so I've enjoyed it far more now, especially in the wake of the amount of political violence here in the United States.
That's what I was going to bring up next, that I think this is a very timely book to be discussing right now. And we had planned this ahead of time, obviously, but it turns out that events in America have made this extremely relevant. We were referring, of course, to what is going on in Minnesota. We don't need to go over the exact details. I'm sure everyone's listened to 5 podcasts recounting it.
I was about to say, I just did one earlier today with Orrin McIntyre and Kevin from the Exit Group.
Yeah, like I bet everyone's got their opinions, they got their takes, and they know which way they want that to go. But I don't think it would be incorrect to look at that and say there's something like collective leftist violence going on there. And some people are even still amazed by that. And there's calls for general strikes. There's people engaging in general strikes right now in 2026. And people are thinking, still, we're doing strikes?
The teachers' unions primarily, which have been the largest aggregators of political power in the United States, that often gets just mentioned when it comes to like the very, I don't want to say it's a mundane issue, but in comparison to all the other existential problems, it is a very mundane issue like school choice in America and like charter schools or educational freedom. Because in a lot of ways, and especially if you live in large metropolitan areas like Chicago or Minneapolis, the teachers union is one of the most important political entities in the country, in that city. Not only does it affect the curriculum, it affects how many days a week is your kid in school, how many days are in the school year, and also the amount of teaching that someone has to do. And usually it's very little actual teaching, and it's a way to easily collect a paycheck while dealing with the same usual bouts of more money for them programs and things like that in education. And the teachers unions across the United States have done great work at radicalizing and your curricula for your kids. And I mean, this is sort of the big silver lining of COVID, right? Was that all of a sudden all the parents had to see what their kids were being exposed to via distance learning. So, I mean, it's an important thing to look at. But in this regard, yeah, like we're still doing general strikes. We're still going to, and you even see this in some more, I guess you could like say early alt-right circles, where it's like white strike worldwide. And it's just like, this is a very older kind of thinking that is harder to find when it comes to exactly Sex Friedman's right. The teachers union goes on a year-long strike. Literacy rates would double. They would, because so much of the crap that gets taught in schools these days is deliberately done to make your kid more retarded.
Dude, I remember being in elementary school, and more than once, I want to say 5 to 6 times, at various points in my school career, we watched the film Austin Powers. Like there's been so many times I've seen that in class, and looking back at the time, you think, wow, great, I love this movie. I don't think anyone did, but you got to watch it in school. Why the fuck were we watching Austin Powers? I remember watching Ren and Stimpy in class. I don't know what this is what happens when you go to public school, by the way, everyone. My wife didn't understand this. She went to a good school. Here's a real conversation that we had a couple weeks ago. She's like, your school didn't have a rowing team? Listen, bitch. You didn't have ski trips? I'm like, mother, we didn't have grass on the field. Do you understand? Do you understand that the world was mud in fucking South Oshawa? But anyway, point being that, look, if you're watching this show, we all hate teachers, just like any red-blooded person. But I think that Georges Sorel would look upon these strikes and he would look upon these direct actions from modern day leftists as already compromised. And we'll get to his overview of the necessity of violence. I'm reminded of what Antifa would do in the past. They would be filling their milkshakes with quick dry cement, all their little cute little tactics, all their things that we're anything they can do to get up to the line of violence, but never actually do it. Blowing an air horn in your face and walking around just shitting their pants and farting and dressing like animals and just being goofy. I think Georges Sorel, being a French syndicalist, would see this as waste of embarrassing the movement. And I think contextually, when was this? This was written in the 30s. Correct me if I'm wrong. When was this written?
This was written I want to say towards the turn of the 20th century.
Yeah, it's pretty old. I should know this going in, but it was hard for me to find the
1908.
1908, yes. Okay, so when we're reading this book, it's from a different time entirely. And I wanted to just mention this, that when I first reviewed this book on my show, I followed it up with another interesting book that might be more well known by our audience, Archaeofuturism by Guillaume Fay. And I believe there was a version released by, I want to say
Arctos Press, yeah.
Yeah, and this was sort of the right-wing counterpart. I hate calling it right-wing, but it was, again, French, and it was written much later, but it was sort of the same sort of story I found. It was about the decline and fall of the New Right, the French New Right. And very similarly, Georges Sorel was talking about the failure of French syndicalism. Where did it all go wrong? That's the part that I loved about this book, was where he's describing where syndicalism just lost its teeth, lost its vigor. And Guillaume Fay very similarly was saying, here's where the French New Right compromised, here's where it's sold out, and here's the sorry state that's in right now. But it's from the same geographic and cultural perspective, but different temporally and different politically. So I would actually recommend those two. And what's interesting, and the reason I bring this up, is it seems that they both fell apart for very much the same reasons. And one could argue that they fell apart for the same reason every revolutionary group does. But I think, by all accounts, the French syndicalist movement was more prone to violence and direct action than the French New Right, which seemed to be more theoretical, is more about publishing books and things like that. But same sort of idea. Do you have any familiarity with that at all?
Archaeofuturism. I've read the book. It's definitely, I think, a product of its time. But I mean, I'm not the biggest historian or someone who's knowledgeable on French history and politics to give that much. That's actually a really good question. How does political violence? Oh boy, just wait until February 8th, when Tom Homan makes a special appearance at the Super Bowl halftime show to arrest Bad Bunny for millions of viewers live on air. Then you'll see. But until then, I think that when it comes to the question of political violence, and also a lot of groups that are just claiming to be revolutionary, is that it's also something that is reflective in our timeline today. We're very, and even Sorel points it out in his text, that we're so averse to violence, despite being shaped by it, and our civilizations being shaped by it, either by war or religious violence and numerous other forms. But it's just that because you and I live in basically a digital panopticon in which every couple of years it gets to change hands between a nominally quote unquote conservative government and nominally open borders libtard government, and they're all the same, really. Let's not kid ourselves. That it becomes harder to discuss violence because you don't want to hurt your own side, because no one wants to be the first guy over the trench. Whereas on the left, as we've seen with all this violence in Minnesota, they really do not care. And they don't have to be, quote unquote, violent. They have to be disruptive and demoralizing with the whistles and the screams and the chastising and the booing, because the left has done the same thing that we've read from Burroughs' book, Days of Rage, that you don't actually have to, quote unquote, kill anybody to be an effective violent revolutionary. You just need to be as like a caltrop. You just need to be as disruptive as possible and be a pain in someone's ass.
No, absolutely. And I think that was the other thing that I loved about this book, which is he was making a historical argument for violence. And that's an argument that I think a lot of people on our side would be familiar with, that this was the state of affairs for most of human history. And I don't have it saved right here, but he has this quote that I'm going to paraphrase. And it was surprising hearing this come from a leftist. That's why I love covering these books. I think this uh, book right here is part of our ongoing exploration into left-wing ideas, and sometimes we lampoon them, but then there's really good ones like this. And I don't know how popular this book is with other leftists or any other syndicalists or anarchists. I mean, they don't read, obviously, but still, you find a lot of these leftists make it. He's quoting Nietzsche. He's talking about, he said, the quote I was paraphrasing was, I would rather live in a world where I could almost be very easily be killed by a stranger than living in the state that we're in now, where we're constantly interrogated out of violence. Like, it feels unnatural. And it was more natural just to allow violence to express itself rather than constantly policing each other and scolding each other. And that's what you detect when you see so many, like when I see a protest, when I see a left-wing protest, hell, even a right-wing protest, but you see more left-wing protests, and you can tell they really want to be violent, but they think they've tricked the system by being as gay as humanly possible. And I'd say that entering into their frame, they would say, no, we're trying to be gay as possible, so we're not threatening while being disruptive. And you just wish they would actually just be violent. I'm saying that because I don't even agree with them, but it would seem more honest than whatever this is when I see fucking communists dressing up like big bouncy frogs and twerking against cops. I'm like, I'm really frustrated by this. I'm not annoyed by it. I'm like, this seems so useless as a society. You know what I mean? Like, everyone clearly wants to do something else. But you know what I mean? Like, it means it's not even disruptive. So why are you doing it? And that's what's so interesting with the Minneapolis thing, because these people are actually being violent now. I'm seeing videos of, these communist agitators targeting who they believe to be ICE agents and attacking them. And I don't know what the consequences of that are, but I'll ask you this, and this was something I was forwarding to my community earlier, maybe even in yours. Do you think, and I think Tim Pool is probably ruined to this question, but do you think we're actually on the precipice of something like a civil war? Now, with the news dropped recently that Trump's going to fucking retreat from Minneapolis, but still, like, it does seem like something was ratcheting up here.
I've compared a lot of what's been happening, as terrible as it may be, to the HBO black comedy, The Second American Civil War, in which conflict happens because of immigration, and it happens because of a right-wing governor in the middle of nowhere who, like all like right-wing memes, his I think he's like sleeping with like the Telemundo host or whatever in his state. But he's basically like, no, like, you've changed the country for good, and like, we're going to go to war over it. And because he closes his border and doesn't accept any refugees. Whereas it's the inverse, obviously, online, because it's like, we would like to deport all of these light bulb headed Somalis committing fraud and rape and abuse. And now it's like, well, we're going to kill you for it. And that's sort of where it's at. There's sort of you can throw all sorts of terms, like xenophilia or oikophobia or whatever you want to use. But I mean, it fundamentally boils down to that there is a definition of what an American is, and it obviously doesn't include them, but they've sided with the alien, they've sided with the enemy. And I mean, unfortunately, I get to live in the most biblically accurate form of Old Testament consequences when you let that sort of thing happen. And I'm being ruled by retards, and I'm being surrounded by foreigners, which is terrifying. But at the end of the day, I think that the question of quote-unquote civil war is that, unfortunately, the best analogy I've heard, and we were talking about this earlier today on Orrin McIntyre's program, was that, if boomers and people in conservative institutions cared about the country's sovereignty and integrity in the same way that the average grill American cares about college football, the right would be in a much better place because they actually care about college football. They don't seem to really care about how existential these things are, even for people who voted for Trump. And so In a civil war, leftists would have state backing. Yeah, they would, because as we saw from the leaked signal chats and the rest of that, this is a highly organized, intricate connection between the state, the government, and all these various NGOs and nonprofits, not to mention the millions and billions of dollars that have come in from foreigners, whether it's Soros or others. And so it's like, I don't know if we're heading towards civil war. I just know that I think since Charlottesville, and for the right, no one wants to do anything where it could potentially lead to conflict. Or J6, because we all know that if a Democrat gets into the office in 2029 and signs in the oath, the FBI, which is politically left wing and will side with the regime every single time, will do everything in their power to arrest people who protest. And which I think makes it very difficult and volatile, because tensions are so high and people want to do something because they feel as if, and again, they're in a feedback. Like this is the other thing, and I'm gonna, pardon me for ranting more than getting to the book, but because we are in these specific feedback loops of information, of react, respond, acknowledge, move on, and then wait for the thing to start all over again when we wake up the next morning and our headlines are filled with whatever we see on our timeline. This is a very specific Twitter problem, mind you, because unless you've turned off the option, with Grok, it's already mapped you out as a political actor and what kind of camp and what specific kind of place it can filter you into. And so with that, it has allowed, I mean, the algo sucks as it is, but that means potentially that, if Elon Musk were to be bought out or kicked out or arrested and jailed and Twitter's nationalized or whatever you can think of happens, all those data sets are now going to be out and about for the algorithm, AI, and other things to now target you and use against you, and to put you perpetually on this self-licking burnout and crash out, ice cream cone, wherein every day we're going to be inching ourselves towards more and more extreme political rhetoric for the purposes of either one day indicting us on accounts of terroristic threats or whatever, or to keep us loaded and primed in such a way that eventually they get what they want and someone does commit some kind of mass casualty event or things like that. I don't think that's too parapolitical. I think that's kind of obvious that there's a lot of studies that says, well, we can basically manipulate basic assumption groups through algorithms and make people think such a way in which someone eventually does act. Because the left has organizations and they have state backing, the right doesn't. And they know that if someone were to go out with, their specific firearm ban of choice, right? The state of Virginia, now controlled by Democrats because the GOP was stupid and ran a Jamaican immigrant to be the Republican ticket. They are now banning, or they want to ban, 30-round magazines for all weapons. They don't want to have a grandfather clause. It would be a misdemeanor, and they only want 10-round magazines. Like, they want full disarmament of people. And I mean, the Second Amendment's already a contentious issue as it is in this country, but I'd rather have guns than not. So overall, I mean, when we talk about violence, it's very difficult on the right to discuss it, because it's like, on one hand, I really want to Fed post and I really want to talk about all the things that have made my blood boil, and to be, I want to be like the network, and just scream and say I'm mad as hell and I don't want to take this anymore. But I also recognize that the time I have is fleeting. And if I were to ever be popular or bigger as an account than I already am, these very words could one day be used in a court document that throws me into the fucking gulag. So it's frustrating, because there's no greater sense of impotence than watching my enemies openly flaunt the law and create armed insurrectionary groups against the nation, which everyone knows what an American is. And unfortunately, there's not going to be an armored car coming down the way full of chuds that just takes out the garbage. So instead, here we are covering.
Yeah. See, the right wing spends so long debating with leftists when they get called a Nazi, like a white person gets called a Nazi, saying, here's how technically I'm not a Nazi. They don't realize that the left just deploys that term to mean white person I'm going to attack. That's what it means to them. Nazi doesn't mean anything else other than white person I've targeted for some reason, something you've said, something you did, something you represent. And that's because they view the world that way and we don't. We're never going to be able to head that attack off. I like what you had said there. You referenced Network, which was, in fact, the episode I recorded with Last Things for his recent Last Picture show, which hasn't come out yet. But it's funny that you want to scream, "I'm mad as hell, I don't want to take it anymore." And anyone who's seen the film will remember how that film ends, which is he gets shot in the head. And that's really where
Harrison Bergeron style.
yeah, it's really interesting movie, and hopefully it'll come out the review that we did sometime soon. I think there's plans to do that, but that in itself is a commentary on violence. That here's this populist hero who's ginned up by the network, and even he's losing faith in himself of being a human. He's just a puppet by the end of it, and he's just shot because at the end of the day, that's what you do to someone that you want to get rid of in a very calculating way. And, like you said, no one wants to Fed post because everyone's terrified, and they have right to be terrified because the hammer will come down on people on our side more than the left, obviously. But you still want to discuss it in analytical terms, just like in this book. And really, one of the main arguments he makes is that violence is the only thing that changes anything. That's the only way to accomplish anything. That's what the revolution is. And once again, there was a question here before I forget, because I was about to say he's a left-wing syndicalist. I believe Mark Trouble was asking, is he seen as more of here's Geo in the chat. Hello, Geo, saying leftist and especially anarchist. Consider Sorel a red fascist or something like that. And I believe
They do.
Mark
There's
Trouble
a lot of
asked,
criticism from Mark, like little O Marxists.
Yeah. Trouble isn't Sorel considered right wing by our side? He very well maybe, but
I know Imperium Press has claimed Sorel as like the prototype of an inspiration for fascism, which I mean is true. If I recall correctly, like Giovanni Gentile was inspired by Sorel and cites him in some of his works on fascism.
Well, Christ, so many of those intellectuals. I'm thinking of a buddy of mine named Zoltanis, who does a series of videos on the history of fascism and really academic stuff, and sort of the overlap between fascism and anarchism and leftism. And he's kind of a red-brown alliance type guy. But if you care about that stuff, there is overlap between a lot of these theories, and maybe they unite over anti-capitalism and whatnot. But that is a good point that Imperium Press did release a version of this that I have to assume is very, very good. But yeah, the question is he seen as a right-wing guy? Probably, maybe that's why we know about him, because I don't know how many leftists read this guy. But I think in his life, he would call himself a socialist. He'd call himself a syndicalist. He would, like I was saying before, he would be aghast at where his movement has gone since 1908, since the publishing of this. That's my sense anyway. Because, and just to firmly establish this at the top, well, not at the top, we're already, Jesus Christ, over half an hour in. Anyway, but saying that, and this is what I always reference people. This is what I always bring up when I think about this book, that if your movement, let's call it a revolution, if your movement is attacking the system, it needs to attack the system fully. If you want to punch someone in the head, the best way to punch them in the head is envision your fist going through their head. You punch in the space behind their head. That's a great way to get the force necessary to knock them out. And that's what he says revolution needs to do. And we'll get to this when we start getting into the readings here, but this is how I summarize it. Him saying that where these revolutions, where his movement went wrong, and so many others do, is that they take the wind out of their sails by negotiating with power, with the system. How many times has that happened? Especially in communism. Like, how many times are you trying to destroy the system, but then they just elect your leaders and bring them into the existing power structure to defang it, and then they can control it now?
Could you go to page 29 in the text, not the PDF? There's a great quote on that very thing you just mentioned that I'd like to kick off this conversation with.
29 in the text. Let me see.
Yes.
Hold on.
It's in the introduction.
Oh, okay.
But I think it's a very worthwhile to read, especially when we talk about engaging with the system. Because when we consider how we engage politically, I think it's an important thing to look at here. And so I'm gonna read it, and we'll hopefully get to it here. But he's in the backdrop of this, he's offering a commentary between socialist utopias and sort of Marxist violent revolutionaries. And of course, Sorel is going to say that violence should be used to pursue Marxist ends. But when talking about, say, our current system at hand, Sorel writes, liberal political economy is one of the best examples of a utopia that could be given. A society was imagined where everything could be reduced to types produced by commerce and operating under the law of the fullest competition. It is recognized today that this kind of ideal society would be as difficult to realize as that of Plato, but several great statesmen of modern times have owed their fame to the efforts they made to introduce something of this ideal of commercial liberty into industrial legislation. Now, the last part, obviously, you're going to get where Sorel's coming from. But again, this I think is something also that can be echoed in the German thinkers as well on parliamentary democracy, as well as commentaries on liberalism, because it is trying to smooth over the greatest conflicts that we have in politics, which is, of course, class distinctions, racial and ethnic and religious differences, and trying to compete for limited resources that do not exist in fullness or in post-scarcity. And so when you try to smooth that over by the fact that we can cooperate and form coalitions, or liberalism enables this sort of utopian way in which we may not get everything that we want, but it is a system that you can engage in, all of a sudden you're now introduced to an idealism rather than a system of practical politics.
That's a great way to start this. And I think you had a lot, and maybe we do this in the middle, but you had focused a bit on his thoughts on religion. And actually, you know what? Maybe let's start with this. Let me just go to page.
Yes, go where you are. I can talk a bit on this. For context, I'm not the most, I'm not a man who is versed in sort of the history of the Reformation in France, and my understanding of French Catholicism comes from the people who post about French Catholicism online, but also my readings of like French Catholic thinkers. So my exposure to like what the common life of a pious French Catholic at this time is going to be vastly different.
My conceptualization of French Catholicism is pulled, of course, from Hispanic schizophrenics online.
Yes, of course. Because who else talks about French Catholicism in a language that I can understand? But I mean, jokes aside, but I found this very interesting in the way in which he's synthesizing a lot of Marxist understandings of Christianity, the differences between French Protestants and French Catholics, but also the way in which violence has been recontextualized, in which it had inspired people to be with the faith. He spends a great chunk of change towards the end of the book in the last third, looking at the ethics of violence and say the comparison of Christian martyrdom as a way that it would open the doors to more of the faithful in comparison to how violence is used to accomplish ends rather than being on the receiving end of it. But there's a lot of aspects of religion that this text really, all these very different essays, they all hit on very similar themes in which the institution of the church had been, a way in which you could have power effectively contained to a small group through the use of moral authority. And then once moral authority gives way to skepticism or to secularization, especially after the French Revolution in 1789, where you killed priests, nuns, and the faithful alike, that now the moral authority has been traded in for, worldly authority. And I mean, for the Christian, that's not going to bother them so much. And Sorel notes this when he starts talking about the issue of, not being of this world, the kingdom is not of this earth. But at the same time, the ability to have that even as an option, it still has to come into contact with the violent force of, say, anti-clericalism or intellectualism against sort of the religious dogma of the time. And I found this, like, it's throughout all of these essays, and I found it incredibly fascinating to get what I guess you could call a Nietzschean socialist to commentate on the power of myth and the power of, the basically religious undertones being necessary to drive forth, and I think that there is something to that where we say, onward, good Christian soldier, whereas in comparison to, say, the pursuance of martyrdom and, say, like the early church.
No, that's a great summation there. I wanted to just jump into this because I found the plot I was looking for. So this sort of tees everything up. He says, today, parliamentary socialists, and he mentions parliamentary socialists a lot, and he would see these groups as the traitors of the cause. You're by nature of being a socialist, you need to be a revolutionary, and if you're a parliamentary socialist, that's an oxymoron in his view. It says, today, parliamentary socialists no longer believe in insurrection. If they still sometimes speak of it, it's to give themselves an air of importance. They teach that the ballot box has replaced the gun, but the means of acquiring power might have changed without there being a change of mental attitude. I like that. Like, that's kind of summarizing what I was saying earlier. It's like, yeah, you changed the tactic, you changed the technique.
You change your views once you get a seat at the table.
Exactly, yeah. And just going to skip ahead here to page...
Which is
50.
particularly interesting because that revolutionary fervor has been discussed a lot these days from on the right as well. And I mean, this is why the Imperium Press has also talked about it, is that you have this desire to, you want to be revolutionaries. Like, and this is something that even our friend Dave Green had talked about a long time ago, where it's like, it's hard to like have conversations with polite liberal company when I kind of agree with them. And I say, I actually don't want a single thing of the current existing order to stand because it's enabled all these like left-wing idiots to be in charge. But at the same time, it's like the same thing we see all the time where people say, oh, you've sold out, or, you know, you got your $7,000 or you got your teal bucks. Like, we like to accuse being in this revolutionary position, usually from an outside position, which enables you to be more radical, that all of a sudden, like, hey, like you don't have that revolutionary fervor. You don't want to go out there and like crush, like, you don't want to do the copy pasta about, you know, who you want to behead or, you know, stir fry in a wok, et cetera, et cetera. And once people, you know, get a seat at the table, they do fundamentally change because it's like, oh, I have a say in this, or, oh, I have a sinecure. And I think that this is what allows a lot of the same reasons for a lot of revolutionary groups to fall away is that they either want to, quote unquote, secure the bag, pardon the term, or more importantly, they're just like, well, I've got a way to live comfortably. I've got mine, so fuck you.
Yeah, it's very easy to do that, especially with the leadership, especially with the intellectuals of any movement. Whatever the power structure is and whatever civilization, they know precisely how to siphon the fuel out of these things. You know, and it's maybe not necessarily with the Bolsheviks, but there's been other examples of these groups, like make them monetarily secure, bring them on side, promise them reform, whatever it might be, because a lot of the leadership doesn't have the stomach to see it through to the end. And maybe now is an interesting time to bring this up, or a salient time. So I was doing a lot of reading recently on the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. A lot of people have heard about them. There's a great many books written about it. I know Keith Woods has talked about them extensively. He's Irish, for those who don't know. But
No way.
Yeah, no way. Keith Woods is fucking Irish. I could go down that road, but I'm not going to. Yeah, the IRA is very interesting. And I was reading this book called Bandit Country, which I'm going to cover on the show in the next few episodes. But it was about the area of South Armagh in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, and figures of the revolutionary movement. And they believe they were a revolutionary movement. Figures like Thomas Murphy. One I even mentioned in the latest Vanguard Journal article, he was an interesting figure because so many of these leaders, these were just farmers, these were family men, these were blacksmiths, these were not academics, they were not Marxist revolutionaries. You know, Tom Murphy, to give one example, was like an elementary school dropout and just owned a farm. This guy had no interest in the global war of the proletariat against the forces of capitalism. He had no interest in forming alliances with, you know, the global south, whatever it is. He was driven by one goal, and that was to get the British out of Ireland. And how do they do that? Well, they're going to use bombs and snipers and kidnapping. And that's how, and it was that one goal. And there was Maoists and Marxists who were trying to infiltrate, and there was different aspects of the entire movement. You know, there's Sinn Féin, which is the political arm, but the IRA was staffed by these people who saw themselves as soldiers. They had one goal in mind, and there's this one quote. They were always frustrated by all these invitations for ceasefires, and they had no interest in a ceasefire. What they want to do is keep killing British soldiers and shooting down their helicopters with Stinger missiles they bought from the Libyans until they go away. And there's one quote from one of their clandestine meetings where they're talking about getting into a room with the British leadership and coming to the table. And he said, I only want to come to the table if we can sneak a bomb under the table and blow them up. Like, this is a guy who was waging war against an enemy. And one thing I will grant leftists is they tend to personify their villain better than we do, in the sense that that's what's going on in Minneapolis. They know who their enemy is. It's ICE agents. It's not an idea. They're not protesting some policy. It's not abstracted. They have targets, and those targets have names and faces, and they seem to be building up the courage to do something about that. But all throughout history, leftists have been pretty quick to do that, to say, like, here, we need to kill billionaires. You should kill your landlord. There's no misconception about who it is they need to kill, where some on our side will say, like, we need to kill liberal Christianity, we need to kill neoliberalism, all kinds of fucking dumb shit. But because they have a target, they can commit direct action. And so they can have a plan of action. Same thing with the IRA, who were not Marxists and were trying to be infiltrated by Marxists. But these were Irish nationalists, first and foremost, end of fucking story. And I think that helped their effectiveness without even trying to come on side of what is globally recognized as a terrorist group. I don't think you can really question their effectiveness until they splintered and schismed into different groups due to internal conflicts, as they often do, which is an interesting story in itself, but we don't need to go into that right now. Point being that I think that singular focus and a victory condition that is clearly laid out. What is the victory condition for this revolutionary group? It's the destruction of this fucking system, or it's the complete and total exit of this group. That's all we're there for. Spare me your theory. Spare me your intellectualism. Spare me your fucking alliance. And this was what even Guillaume Fay was saying about the French New Right, is they started dabbling in Islamism and all kinds of shit just because they were desperate for ends. They didn't have a victory condition. They didn't have a goal. They didn't have a target. They didn't have a heading, which is what you need. And I think at least Georges Sorel is being honest when he says, if we're talking violence, what the fuck do you think violence is? If you're attacking the system, what do you think that looks like? You attack until it's gone. Otherwise, what are we doing here? Otherwise, we're just finding a mid-level job for our own leaders within the system. And that's his main point in criticism. And I don't think that criticism is wrong. And I'll leave that to the chat. And what do you think about all that?
Yeah, I think that becomes the big criticism is that, well, what are you trying to accomplish? And are you willing to settle with the system because it's safer for you? Or are you of a quality of a person that wants to go forward and do things? I mean, of course, eventually the IRA does get its relative end, and I think that has a lot to do, of course, with the Good Friday Accords and the brunt and force of forcing the hand from the American government. But I mean, it was something that had played a role for the Troubles for, decades. And that there are still, I'm sure, some militant groups now that are happy to come back and have said that they're willing to use violent force, not only against the Irish government, but against anyone who is willing to put migrants in Ireland. And I mean, how much of that remains to be seen with kinetic lethal force is questionable, because if so, then that's the first case of like instantiated right-wing violence I've seen really in my lifetime that wasn't one-off, or say like the Aryan Brotherhood killing someone in prison, because that is the main statistic that they use to say that right-wing violence is so high, is they just count ethnic gang warfare in prison on as right-wing violence. But
they also count like Muslim violence as right-wing violence sometimes.
Whatever is convenient to sell the argument that like actually that white right-wingers are the most violent people on earth. And that's really why it's there, and it's meant to generate more grant money to investigate extremism and more surveillance technologies that is meant to keep people like you and I from ever having discussions even about this book, because that's what they want to do, is to instill it in such a way where you're not allowed to have that discussion. So furthermore, I think for that conversation, also what Sorel is talking about, is that you really do need mythos, and he buys off on this. This is that violence requires mythology, and it requires something that you have to believe that you're dying for something greater than yourself. This is why I find the religious through lines throughout this entirety of the text. But also that, I know some people will say, well, like Sorel doesn't talk about the like material conditions that would require revolution to happen. And I would, just tell people to go read Jack Goldstone's Revolution and Rebellion if you want some of the material arguments for it. But I mean, even the material conditions as they get bad, so like in the French Revolution, is like what Goldstone notes is that you had an overproduction of lawyers and more men were not dying as the health improved, but there was also famine, a lack of jobs, and a lack of access to titles and nobility. Those are all very valid material conditions to strike out against. This is pre-industrial revolution, mind you. And as they do so, what are they circling behind? Well, where do guys go to talk? The third place still existed. It was coffee houses, it was law, lectures and study halls. And that's when you could come together and form idealism, brotherhood, fraternity, and lo and behold, you have a mythos or a founding cause of, well, we can be positive and we can be vital. And now all of a sudden our arguments that, well, these things don't make sense. You're not going to do that. Well, now, actually violence is the ultimate expression of the will to power. And this is where he kind of throws out a lot of the, say, orthodox Marxism out the way and saying, actually, no, the myth as the creative force allows us to see that materialism alone isn't sufficient, because even if all my material conditions were met, I would still find a way to struggle. And again, building off of Christianity and building off of Friedrich Nietzsche's work, like all of a sudden, Sorel kind of synthesizes man's struggle and man's desire for God. And he's like, well, not only can you overcome that, you can actually be the guy that kills God, and you can accomplish anything in that matter. And so I find that this text
French moment.
French moment indeed. But I mean, it is really true. But I mean, however, like I think that there is something there that you actually have to have heroic action. And I mean, I think that this is a uniquely French expression because of both Renan talks about this, who he's responding to, like in Ernst Renan's What is a Nation? He talks about his heroes, like a nation is built upon its heroes and what heroes we descend from. And I think that, Sorel kind of responds to that and saying like, well, that's true. But also like, we can't just simply say, well, we want better working conditions. Like we have to be willing to actually stretch out with violent force to secure better conditions for ourselves and to reduce these proletarian ills of suppression.
Yeah, and they want heads. They want blood in the streets. They're willing to do it. And I think that revolutionary fervor is still present, but I think people have been so propagandized against it. And this is why when we discuss this, we're careful to separate analysis from advocacy. So I would group all of this in with analysis, even saying that it appears obvious that anything that is mattered in society seems to have been done through violence, any sort of political change, including the founding of America. Is that a pretty big one? Is that a pretty important one? Well, it was the same sort of fucking thing going on there. And it can be exciting. It can be positive, but it requires an enemy. It requires you attacking the enemy and having a clear victory condition. And, for some, it's political reform. I think due to the depth of his belief in syndicalism, like I really do think that he would view the entire system, as many of our listeners might, the entire system as the problem, something that must be deconstructed. And so the people must overwhelm it. And I don't think, even though some do on our side, I don't think there's that much of an interest in mass collective action. I think people are very cynical. And I think our groupings are a lot more kinetic. We find that more practical. We're on the left, when we're seeing the pushback against ICE, for example, they still love the idea of the general strike. Like they would prefer 20,000 teachers walking out just because of the mass and scale versus a terrorist action, right? Whereas people on the right might prefer the terrorist action. I'm not justifying it, but they very well might. Like, we're not that interested in seeing 25,000 people do fucking anything. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean, marching together? That doesn't accomplish anything. But within the left, they still love that idea. And that's why I loved Georges Sorel saying, like, okay, you can collectivize, you can get a lot of people together. What are you doing? What is this strike? Because the way he describes a strike is a lot more violent. It's a more traditional understanding what a strike was. Whereas now it's just, it's a school walkout. It's a bed-in. It's been polluted by celebrities doing a strike or calling for it. Edward Norton is on some fucking show, some Instagram show, calling for a strike, saying, I think there should be more retail workers involved. Like, this isn't anything. But they still think it matters because they're still dealing in a language of populist scale in a way that we don't. Anyway, I just wanted to jump to this part here on page 50. He says, in order to understand this situation, we must remember the important part played by revolutionary wars in our history. And remember, he's going deep into history for this, most of this book. An enormous number of our political ideas originated in war. This might be why people think he's a right-wing guy. War presupposes the union of national forces against the enemy of our French historians who have always severely criticized those insurrections which hamper the defense of the homeland. It seems that our democracy is harder on its rebels than the monarchies are. That's another theme that he establishes in the book, that monarchy is even preferable to democracy. I think he hates democracy more than anything. I think he sees that as the primary engine, like a newer, more advanced engine with which to compromise and subvert people. Like he would, as he said, he would prefer violence to be more open. He would rather live in a more violent society, a traditional society, and I think he would find it preferable to live in a monarchy because at least then you know where the power is coming from, whereas in democracy it is dispersed and disseminated, and people just aren't able to grapple with that. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and I think that he's also responding to sort of the arguments of de Maistre as well, because he cites that in there. Is that so much of the French conception of authority is derived from a lot of these Catholic pro-monarchist figures, when they're sort of not taking a look at sort of the perhaps other side of the coin when it comes to myth, purpose, and sovereignty, or moral authority. And it's just that there is accountability in the monarchists, because as de Maistre writes, you can kill a monarch, like you can just kill the monarch, right? You can kill the sovereign. Whereas in a democratic or a parliamentary system, the responsibility of power, i.e. every man, is a representative of the people, you don't know how many people you quote unquote have to send to the gallows in order to do so. And it's like, justice is not just reprimanding somebody because you disagree with them on, say, like a certain like philosophical notion. For Sorel, is what he points out is that you actually have to use that force to achieve the ends rather than to conceptualize it and simply say, oh, well, this is how things would work in practice. And it's like, no, like in practice, you would actually use force to accomplish said goal. And I think that this is a really important thing to consider, that when like, oh, the strike is interesting, but also this isn't a time when, this was the Industrial Revolution and industrial society was far more prevalent in comparison to, say, in America, and by extension, any Western nation that has dealt with the American cultural export, that we have to now deal with the civil rights movement, like, oh, the marching. But it's like there were still race riots and violent action happening in the 1960s. And of course, like they knew at a certain point that they had achieved the necessary amount of backing from the state, more or less. Like Eisenhower called the National Guard in. They knew that the police was going to probably, maybe they won't be on their side because like maybe the cop's racist, but like no one wants the accusation thrown in their face. We've seen this as far back as the 1940s, that communist activists would use racism or claims of fascism to silence legitimate criticism against whether it be like busing or other forms of basically just like ethnic cleansing of whites out of the cities.
Yeah, I forget which internet girl said this, but it was a pretty good quote where she said, "Fascism is when you're told no." Like that's all they understand fascism to be. It's when you say no and they're scared that you saying no might actually work. Then it becomes fascism. Just pointing to what we were just talking about, I find this part interesting. On let me see if I can get it. Here we go. Perfect. He says, there are so many legal precautions against violence, and our education is directed towards so weakening our tendencies toward violence that we are instinctively inclined to think that any act of violence is a manifestation of a return to barbarism. And I think that was just what you're describing, like how even back at the start, how on the right we've become so neurotic about it. We become so self-policing about any even mention of violence. But I think this extends even to our academic system, our political system, where if you mention that violence in a situation could be valid, you've lost. You've lost in the marketplace of ideas. And I don't think that works anymore. I don't think anybody is enthralled by the marketplace of ideas, by debate, right? Left or right, or anarchist, or wherever. I don't think people, the age of discourse has been dead for quite some time, but I don't think anyone's interested in that anymore. So what is left? It's just a spectrum of violence. And it continues on here. Paul Burak was extremely surprised. Let me make sure. I think I might need to scroll down here. 75. Anyway, I'll just keep reading. Paul Burak was extremely surprised to find in Norway a rural population which had remained profoundly Christian. The peasants, nevertheless, carried a dagger in their belt. When a quarrel ended with a stabbing, the police inquiry generally came to nothing for lack of witnesses ready to come forward to give evidence. The author concludes thus. In men, a soft and effeminate character is more to be feared than their feeling of independence, of independence. However exaggerated and brutal, and a stab given by a man who is virtuous in his morals but violent is a social evil less serious and more easily curable than the excessive profligacy of young men reputed to be more civilized. That's something I always thought back to. Here's a man, 20th century French syndicalist, and he's identifying with a bunch of dagger-wielding Christians, but saying that their violence driven by this virtue is not as egregious as cowardice. And we saw the exact same argument made in an earlier episode. What was it, by Ivan Ilyin? And
on resistance to evil by force.
Yes. Basically the same premise, and he was arguing against Tolstoy's overview, his outlook that Christianity must be pacifist. If you encounter evil, you should allow yourself to be trampled by evil due to the belief that God wins in the end. And he said, no, that's not what God wants. That's not God's plan. Your purpose here is to resist evil. If you encounter evil, you must apprehend it and you must interrogate it. You must do something about evil. And that will involve utilizing force. That will involve perhaps even utilizing violence. And he's very vague on what that means. But, I think this right here is saying that, this idea of violence as something that is just always evil and malicious is not the case. It can be done virtuously. I think that idea is so alien to so many mainstream people right now. I don't even know how you introduce that idea except through this episode. But it's deeper than logic. It's deeper than rationality. They just feel it. It's very difficult to untangle that knot inside of them that just knows when you hear someone talk about violence, that's not just condemning it outright. I'm scared. I'm uncomfortable. I can't even look at this idea. I refuse to accept it. That's what most people feel. And, this was not the case throughout human history. It was a given that violence was a part of life and that it could be done virtuously. And it was only evil violence that you wanted to address. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. And I mean, you also see this in his commentary with respects to how the political system at time, right, with electoral dealings. Like he writes, I'm just going to read it out. No need to find the quote. We can keep going on in the later sections. But Sorel writes, electoral dealings have led many Republicans to recognize that socialists obtain great successes by using the passions of jealousy, of deception, or of hate which exist in the world. Then they become aware of the class struggle, and many have borrowed the jargon from parliamentary socialists. That sounds familiar now, doesn't it? In this way, the party that is called Radical Socialist was born. Clemenceau even asserts that he knows moderates who became socialists overnight. In France, he said, the socialists that I know are excellent radicals who, thinking that social reforms do not advance quickly enough to please them, argue that it is good tactics to claim the greater in order to get the less. very familiar to even our, at least in America. I certainly see that a lot today, where it's like, we need to be revolutionaries, however, and we're going to claim all these big, great things, but we're still going to get less by claiming the bigger, especially in sort of this, the quote unquote, like DSA kids that have their own faction inside the Democratic Party that I think are kind of freewheeling and dealing in a lot of the staff sections. But I think it's a kind of interesting to even the right recognizes, the Republicans at the time recognize the electoral successes of envy, of jealousy, of hate, lying, all the things that we associate the left with, because if there were no double standards, the left would have no standards at all. And so, that jargon then gets used on the right or by the Republicans. Isn't that interesting? We see this all the time where, the left are the real racists, or we want reform, or we want to do criminal justice reform, i.e., like the libertarians akin to Rand and Ron Paul on those issues. Not to say that the state doesn't have a lot of problems, but it's hard to have criminal justice reform when the hate and deception and jealousy comes from more of the hatred that would come from the analysis of Lothrop Stoddard than, say, like Pat Buchanan. But I think that when it comes also to the issue of violence and looking at sort of these movements between um, fighting about what does it mean to find success in politics or to find success in meaning. It's something that Sorel spends a great time on. And again, with this religious through line, he writes, quote, "I observe, first of all, that the theories and actions of the peacemakers are founded on the notion of duty, and that duty is something entirely indeterminate, specifically speaking about the lawmen versus strikers and political activists. Whilst law seeks rigid definition, whereas the notion of duty, and duty is very indeterminate. The difference is due to the fact that the latter finds a real basis in the economics of production, while the former is founded on the sentiments of resignation, goodness, and sacrifice. Who can judge whether someone who submits to duty has been sufficiently resigned, good, and self-sacrificing? The Christian is convinced that he will never succeed in doing all that the gospel demands of him. When he is free from all the economic ties in a monastery, he invents all sorts of pious obligations so that he may bring his life nearer to that of Christ, who loved men to the point that he accepted such an ignominious fate that they might be redeemed. In the economic world, everyone limits his duty according to his unwillingness to give up certain profits. If the employer is always convinced that he has done his duty, the worker will be of the contrary opinion, and no argument could settle the matter. The first will believe that he has been heroic, and the second will treat the supposed heroism as shameful exploitation." Sorel, by the way, not really a Christian at all, obviously, but I think that this is an interesting way to look into sort of the Marxist viewpoint on this issue, because now we have a way in which we can break this down and say specifically that as long as you still have master over, and again, this is where you get a lot of the old oppressor-oppressed narratives, but like we now have someone at the top who thinks that they have done their duty. We have done what is good. We have given you the wage. You have paid my workers. I have done what is the best that I can. This is still going to lead to resentment because like you haven't done enough. Or if anything, you are still keeping me down and I will never meet what you ask of me, and what I've been given so little of in this economic world is bullshit. Whereas in comparison to the Christian, you don't have these same kind of concerns. I kind of disagree with that. But nevertheless, I think that there's some interesting through lines here when it comes to the issue of violence, because it's like, well, again, this goes back to what you were mentioning, Dimes, with Ivan Illich, right? Like we can back off and say like, no, we can't just be pacifists about this. Like we're supposed to struggle. The master does in fact want to see you working. You cannot bury your talent. You cannot bury the talents that were given to you and hope that things will be fine when he comes back, right? Whereas in this case, for Sorel, it's like, well, you can have some economic obligations freed of you, but at the same time, whereas unlike the Christian understanding of soteriology, for Marxists and for materialists, all that it leads to is that the law doesn't matter. I still want more because you've sent me to this lot, and I refuse to do anything about it, and instead I'm going to overthrow my master.
Yeah, what's so interesting is that I found that Marx, we read Capital by Marx on the show a long time ago. He was not averse to getting into history and getting into these metaphysical claims. Of course, his dialectical materialism was very concerned with economics, but like Sorel, like he had an interest in history and making historical arguments for things like Sorel's doing here. And this is why you might be confused for a right-wing thinker, because he's talking about things in a very, I hate using the word right-wing, as I said, but in a very rightist sort of way. He's talking about duty. He's talking about virtue. He's talking about something outside the law. And that's something you had said at the top of the last quote you had, which is that this drive for violence, it's outside the law. It's deeper than the law. It's something that the law is trying to address, but it never can. It can only sort of litigate it away, but it can never really remove it. And I find that so fascinating that he's one of the few writers, I think, that's still trying to bring about these leftist ideas using history and using metaphysics and trying to appeal to this idea of virtue and duty, which you never see. The very fact that he's trying to summon history and not just sweep it away like so many other leftist writers and intellectuals try to do, like see history as the enemy, whereas he's trying to pull from it and make a case for, because I think that's the only way to do it. It's very difficult to advocate for leftist violence unless you're making a naturalistic argument for it. Maybe that's why so many leftists are bad at violence. That's why they're dressing up as fucking animals.
I mean, this is what I find Sorel to be really good at is that he's, I mean, you may disagree with his interpretation of history, but I mean, at least he's providing a historical narrative that just goes beyond the material. He's also pointing out the history of duty or social virtue, or what are the virtues of a man to do something, right? Like when we talk about like the needs of the workers, Sorel writes, and he continues on here, pardon me for reading more, but he says, the employers generally agreed to discuss disputes on the lines, and the demands of the workers they reply to have already reached the limit of possible concessions, while the philanthropists wonder whether or not the selling price will not allow a slight increase in wages. Such a discussion presupposes that it is possible to ascertain the exact extent of social duty and what sacrifices an employer must continue to make in order to maintain his position, as there is no reasoning capable of resolving such a problem. The wise men suggest recourse to arbitration. Rabelais would have suggested recourse to a chance of dice. When the strike is important, parliamentary deputies loudly call for an inquiry and the object of discovering if the leaders of industry are properly fulfilling their duties as good masters. Results are achieved in this way, which nevertheless seems so absurd because on one hand, the large employers have been brought up with civic, philanthropic, and religious ideals, and on the other hand, because they cannot show themselves too stubborn when certain things are demanded by the people occupying high positions in the country. Conciliators stake on their pride in succeeding. They would be extremely offended if industrial leaders prevented them from making them the social peace. The workers are in a more favorable position because the prestige of the peacemakers is much less among them than that with the capitalists. The latter therefore give way to much more easily than the workers in letting the well-intentioned to have the glory of ending the conflict. It is noticeable that these methods only rarely succeed when the matter is in the hands of former workers who have become rich. Literary, moral, or sociological considerations have very little effect upon people born outside of the ranks of the bourgeoisie. And that fits very true with what you were talking about, the people who carried a dagger on them at all times. Morals mean very little when you live in a low-trust, shit-in part of society where you have to defend yourself.
Absolutely. And you know what? Keeping on the path of religiousness here, there's this part from page 207. Once again, I apologize, everyone. I think we ended up with different copies of the same book, and so our page numbers are all out of whack. And I don't know any way to solve that. But he says here, and I really want to hear what you think about this.
What's essay section so listeners can also follow along later on?
I'm on page 207, The Ethics of Violence.
Okay, great.
He says, religious ethics claim to possess this source of action that is wanting in lay ethics. But here it's necessary to make a distinction if an error into which so many authors have fallen is to be avoided. The great mass of Christians do not carry out the real Christian ethic, that which the philosopher considers as really peculiar to their religion. The society of people who profess Catholicism are chiefly preoccupied with probabilism, mechanical rites, and proceedings more or less related to magic, which are calculated to assure their present and future happiness in spite of their sins. Theoretical Christianity, this is the part I thought was interesting. Theoretical Christianity has never been a religion suited to society people. The doctors of the spiritual life have always reasoned about those people who are able to escape the conditions of ordinary life. And I just thought that was interesting. He was breaking down different types of Christians, and that, you know, these different strata of Christians maybe aren't engaging with the ethics within Christianity, which might be something similar to what we're describing, with Ivan Illian's approach to evil and violence. So many of those who would be the most adverse to violence within Catholicism, Christianity broadly, but let's say Catholicism here, they're just concerned with what he sees as the magic rites for a happy afterlife, and nothing more deeper or philosophical than that. What do you think about that?
I mean, I have to consider Sorel's position, and I also have to consider these may have been the positions held by quite a few people criticizing perhaps the piety or the rights and the ecclesiastical authority of the church, especially in the wake of the Reformation. But I mean, if you're looking at this from the sense of maybe a materialist or a Marxist, that you're not really going to consider that morality, like the religious feeling or fervor that someone has to have faith, is really going to matter when there are all these, bits and baubles that comes within the aspect of religion, whether that be ritual, whether that be dogma, or the rest. Whereas I think for a great deal of people, I mean, at the same time, though, there's a great deal of people that will claim that they believe in something, but then don't practice it at all whatsoever. I mean, there's numerous studies about this on, at least in Christianity in the United States. It's like, and even people I don't like at all, like Rod Dreher had pointed out to the data in their own work, where it's just like, listen, if you go to church more than, Christmas and Easter and the occasional Sunday, you're already a minority by the nature of actually being someone who's involved with their church or being involved in the Christian faith and trying to practice it. So, and I mean, as he carries on, we have, a lot of these sort of respects to moral convictions, and he calls them lofty moral convictions later on, where he talks about like, the Christian ethic in comparison to say like the material or the liberal ethic about what's to be done, because like you can compare, the state of trying to live out the gospel, which is incredibly difficult to do, and it's impossible without God. You see the established church being now the position to offer morals, and this is where he looks at the institutions. He looks at it through the lens of power, and then he sees that in comparison to the revolution, where now the fundamental errors of liberalism can be practiced out. But however, you don't have to really, as Sorel points out, like anyone who was like pro-clericalism at the time doesn't really have to worry about that anymore, because they're like, oh, we can just test out these ideas and see how they go. Well, the ideas got played out, and clergy and monarchists and people got the guillotine. And so in that sense, like, you can be very removed from scholasticism. You can be very removed from any sense of Christian ethics or morals. When liberalism sort of, I think, basically allows the violence to speak over anything else, because that determines what's within comfortable frames of political reference, the Overton window, so to speak.
We have an interesting comment here from Anon Adonis. It says the left is usually bad at violence because their drive for such emerges from resentments rather than from an actual sense of justice. Hence, also the insane cruelties they inflict with such glee. You think that's true? I think that's true.
That reminds me very much of what everyone's favorite German writer and philosopher wrote about when it comes to humanity. That he Schmidt notes this, and I think it's in the concept of the political specifically.
Oh, I thought you meant Hitler.
I would have said Austrian, buddy. Calm down. I would have said Austrian. I know where he's from. But anyways, Schmidt famously wrote that the invocation of humanity is the greatest sign in which the most inhuman things are going to happen to you. I'm literally going to just pull it up so I can quote it properly because it's so good. So I can pull it out. Here he goes. He says, the concept of humanity is an especially useful ideological instrument of imperialist expansion, and its ethical humanitarian form it is a specific vehicle of economic imperialism. Here is one reminds of a somewhat modified expression of Proudhon's: whoever invokes humanity wants to cheat. To confiscate the word humanity, to invoke and monopolize such a term, probably has certain incalculable effects, such as denying the enemy the quality of being human and declaring him to be an outlaw of humanity, and a war can thereby be driven to the most extreme inhumanity. End quote. That's from Concept of the Political.
Hey, you want to know who said something very similar? I'm pretty sure, and you can fact check me on this.
Mm-hmm.
George Kennan.
He did.
I think when he's talking about using sort of the universalizing humanity as justification for military action, I think he was one of many, but certainly one of the most popular in America, and American himself, who was saying that these justifications, it's a smokescreen, it's just propaganda.
Yeah.
And who would buy into that still? I think people buy into it. Do they, like, I want to say the eternal shit lib, but I do wonder.
I think it's an older degree of sort of a liberal humanitarianism that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, it does vestigally. Like, I mean, boomers maybe. I think the last bit of this sort of liberal universalism that invokes humanity was really present. I think maybe in the 90s with like the WTO protests, because it's like, not only are you depriving the worker of his position, you are now also going to be exploiting all of mankind through cheap slave labor and slave wages and environmental destruction. Like, these are the last. I think, like, environmentalism in a lot of ways maybe is the last part of that. But even then, it isn't, because environmental causes these days really just asks the basically the global north, the white world, to just kneecap itself for the sake of the rest, which Fareed Zakaria wrote about in the 90s. And then when you read what he was saying, like the rest catching up with the West, and it's just like, wait a second, there was a progressive American white guy in the 1910s and 20s who wrote this exact same thing.
I wanted to I was gonna say something, I completely forget what it was. Anyway, doesn't fucking matter. We gotta get back to the book anyway.
Yeah.
If it occurs to me, I'll say it.
Sure.
I got a part here that I don't have a page number for. I think it was built off of. I mixed up the flow of this before, so I'm just going to read it.
Yeah.
This is where he's talking about parliamentary socialism and his frustration with it. Just to encapsulate that a bit more, he says, parliamentary socialism speaks as many languages as it has types of clients. It addresses itself to workmen, to small employers, to peasants, and, in spite of Engels, it aims at reaching farmers. At times it's patriotic. At others it rants against the army. No contradiction is too great. Experience having shown that it is possible in the course of an electoral campaign to group together forces which, according to Marxist conceptions, should normally be antagonistic. In the end, the term proletariat becomes synonymous with the oppressed, and there are the oppressed in all classes. And that's interesting, because I think a lot of people now would see the proletariat as the oppressed, but you can, as we have seen in leftist discourse, you can find the oppressed in any class. But is there a uniform oppressed class beneath the power? I think we've lost that entirely. I think that's what they had the progressive stack for. Everyone has heard, or maybe you haven't if you're young, we were talking about such a thing as the progressive stack back during Occupy Wall Street. I think that's been completely disseminated throughout leftist thought, so you don't even hear it discussed like that. But it is this idea that there are a strata of oppression, and there's within this ill-defined proletarian class, there are subclasses, and those subclasses vie for influence and power within it. But I think he was pointing to the problem with it, like that is it. You can, if you're doing that, then you can find, like, is a billionaire in a wheelchair more oppressed than a billionaire who can walk? And as I said, I don't know of any billionaire who's in a wheelchair. That's kind of fucked up, isn't it? Anyway, but really though, why couldn't you theoretically apply that in all those different directions? And I think once again he would be, aghast at where this has gone, because I think that honestly is one of the main reasons the left cannibalizes itself. I hate saying that. I used to see that on Reddit. The left eats their own. I hate talking like that. But as bad as we
I don't think they do anymore.
Probably not, since they chased all the $1 million extreme fans from there. Anyway, the idea is that as bad as we think we are over here in whatever this thing of ours is, you got nothing on how chaotic, and you want to talk circular firing squads. Let's talk about an infinity sign of firing. A Mobius strip of firing squads is what they got over there.
That's a great mental picture.
God, I'm smart as shit. I'm smart as... But yeah, like that's a problem that at the time this parliamentary socialism and the complete fracturing of what was once, because without a unified proletarian class, then what have you? Well, then you have what Martin Gurry would refer to as, we don't have a public, we have publics. We have groups of affiliation, of identities of affiliation that are themselves stacked up. And so I don't know. I don't know how classical Marxism fits within that 21st century model. I don't think it does. And I think it spent the entire 20th century trying to address that through technology and through metaphysics and fucking with anti-Oedipus and Zizek and all this weird shit. And I think it's done a worse and worse job at it. You know, I think honestly, like if you read more right-wing nonfiction, you will end up with a clearer view of the world and the forces at work. I think if you read leftist literature, you get more confused. I don't think it's possible to get really deep into leftist critique without coming out the other end as completely incomprehensible and unfuckable. Honestly, I've seen that happen too, you know? So,
well, I mean, this text itself is really a metapolitical interrogation of socialism.
yes.
Which I appreciate. I mean, like for instance, when talking about like parliamentary socialism, you know, this whole party socialism, you know, when talking about violence and the decadence of the bourgeoisie and violence, you know, he writes about official socialism, i.e., party brand socialism. You know, the two methods of change favored by official socialism presuppose the same historical datum: the ideology of a timorous humanitarian bourgeoisie professing to have freed its thought from the conditions of its existence is grafted on to the degeneration of the capitalist economy. The race of bold captains who made the greatness of modern industry disappear to make way for the ultra-civilized aristocracy that demands to be left in peace. Interesting. Where have I heard that before? The degeneration fills our parliamentary socialists with joy. Their role would vanish if they were confronted with a bourgeoisie that was energetically engaged on the paths of economic progress, which regarded timidity with shame, and it was proud in looking after its class interests. In the presence of a bourgeoisie that has become almost as stupid as the nobility of the 18th century, their power is enormous. If the degradation of the upper middle classes continues to progress at the pace it has taken in the last few years, our official socialists may reasonably hope to reach their goals of their dreams and sleep in sumptuous mansions. He says, however, the things that would be able to stop this movement would be a great foreign war, which might reinvigorate the lost energies, which in any case, which doubtless would bring into government men and the will to govern. Looking at you, Palmer Lucky. Or a great extension of proletarian violence, which would also make the revolutionary reality evident to the bourgeoisie and would lead to their disgust with humanitarian platitudes in which Jaurès lulls them to sleep. It is in these two great dangers in mind that the latter deploys all his skills as a popular orator. European peace must be maintained at any price, and a limit must be put on proletarian violence. Kind of funny that America's dealing with both of those right now.
Yeah.
We're kind of concerned about a great foreign war, and also we're basically fighting a whole bunch of foreign wars anyways, but also we're concerned about the ongoing uprisings, or at least the government used to be, and this administration is certainly more interested in the proletarian uprisings of basically, I can't even call it like the government's interested, it's like the administration is, but like most of the FBI would happily cheer on a revolution, Haitian-style revolution, and would probably help facilitate it.
The ultimate black pill is reading something that's from 1.25 centuries ago and finding it directly relatable to what you're experiencing now. You know what I mean? So yeah, oh fuck, we're doing the exact same shit. Nothing ever happens. That's man.
I mean, it's nothing new under the sun. Like, sorry, like Ecclesiastes stays winning.
Sorry, Ecclesiastes stays winning. We got a lot of good episode titles from this so far. He gets back to, I have a section here about the nature of revolutions.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
So he says here, for a very long time, the revolution appeared to be essentially a succession of glorious wars, which a people, famished for liberty and carried away by the noblest passions, had maintained against a coalition of all the powers of oppression and error. The riots and the coup d'etat, the struggles between parties often devoid of any scruple, and the banishing of the vanquished, the parliamentary debates and the adventures of illustrious men. In a word, all the events of political history were, in the eyes of our fathers, only very secondary accessories to the wars of liberty. And, we had a comment here before, and it was actually a super chat. I want to get to it. It was for, I think, like $1.99 American, which is like $20 Canadian. He says, my face when New Vegas understands politicians more than plebs. And I wanted to connect that to what I was about to say, which was, war never changes. Like the idea here that all this shit, all of the coup d'etats, and all of these identifications we've given these subsets of violence, these subcategories of violence, it's all part of the grand violence, as he describes it, as the wars for liberty. And I do think it's true to say that would be how they understood it. Your forefathers would understand just a fight against an oppressor, or whatever you perceive to be an oppressor. Although I do think it's untrue, and this is where I believe his syndicalism is showing that it was always a struggle. Like the serf was always struggling against the
One
lord.
must imagine the serf unhappy.
Yeah, exactly. Like in their minds, that was always the case. Any power structure, anyone that has power over you, you must always want to defeat and rape them. And I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case for most of human history. But it's interesting that is his fundamental belief. Like the illegitimate, no matter how well researched he is, no matter how appealing he might be to right-wing thought, there is that note in everything, that ringing you can hear in the background, that all power is illegitimate and all struggle against power is therefore legitimate. And violence, as much as he defends violence, I think he's only defending violence from the oppressed against the oppressor. I think that's important to keep in context as well. Like at the end of the day, if you want to look at it that way, then all we're talking about is war. It's just war with a different narrative from either side.
Yeah.
So and he believes the underclass are justified, but I don't even think that's applicable anymore. We find it interesting. We find it interesting because we're trying to justify the violence through the history of violence. But also and also his, again, just to circle this back to the beginning, his belief that if you are at war, you need to be at war. You can't be at war rhetorically. You can't be at war ideologically. War is war. He's saying that's how your ancestors. If you're engaged in war for your own liberty against an oppressor, the ever-present, eternal oppressor, well, it is a fucking war. It's a war with, as the case with the IRA, bombs and snipers and kidnappings. That's what it is. What else could it be? What else are you doing if not that? That's a good question. And again, we're trying to remain in the realm of analysis and not the realm of advocacy, but that does seem true. And it does seem that we're always on that route. And some people will say, nothing ever happens. Yes, of course. But it always seems like it could. And we're betting that it won't happen because we're betting against ourselves. We're betting against the vigor of our own people, that we are that propagandized, that we are that anesthetized against what everyone assumes should happen, which is a civil war, which is like Trump should be sending in the army to break up and fucking decimate this communist revolution that is in the Minneapolis streets, but they won't. You don't know why they won't? Because they didn't do that with the Chaz or the Chop. Remember that?
Yeah.
Remember when a bunch of communists literally took over a segment of a couple of different cities? Like one was Washington, D.C., and then every crime imaginable was taking place in there. They chased off the police, they chased off all authority, and it was an abattoir of rape and kidnapping and drug use and whatever you can imagine, and they didn't do anything then, and it would have been easy then. It was an easier moral case back then, but they didn't want to do it. They said, let's let them embarrass themselves. They'll get tired and go home. They're a bunch of kids. But that allows them to control the narrative. That grants them the authorship of the thing. No one talks about it anymore. What it should have been was a fucking massacre. What it should have been was a bunch of tanks rolling over people. And then they can cry about it later, but then we'll remind them why it happened. That would at least grant half of the authorship to the other side. But now it's just a thing they would rather you forget. And you can forget because you let them control the 360 degrees of that entire situation. Anyway, that was just a total fucking tangent right there. But
Well,
really,
there's
but really,
something-
why
there's something
there should
to
be
it
something,
about
yeah.
conflict, right? Because I mean, like you mentioned, the war never changes things. And thank you, Not Grim, for the super chat. I appreciate it. Because in the same section here about the decadence of the bourgeoisie and violence is like, again, this is very Nietzschean, and you would see this kind of argument today about the necessity of conflict. This is almost like Cormac McCarthy's The Judge talking about war, because he talks about like the proletariat and the capitalist as iron sharpens iron in the current system of parliamentary democracy, and that it requires the two to address each other in order to understand their own position. And if the capitalist wants to stay alive, then it has to do these things. So he writes the following. Not only can proletarian violence ensure the future revolution, but it also seems to be the only means by which European nations, stupefied by humanitarianism, can recover their former energy. This violence compels capitalism to restrict its attention solely to its material role and tends to restore it to its warlike qualities as it formerly possessed. A growing and solidly organized working class can force the capitalist class to remain ardent in the industrial struggle. If a united and revolutionary proletariat confronts a rich bourgeoisie eager for conquest, capitalist society will reach its historical perfection. Thus, proletarian violence has become an essential factor in Marxism. Let us add once more that if properly conducted, it will have the result of suppressing parliamentary socialism, which will no longer be able to pose as the leader of the working class and its guardian of order. And again, like we had said earlier, like it's hard to, those accusations about the seat at the table, those accusations about the sinecures, the pay cuts. A little harder to, talk about those things when they're, eating the dogs, eating the cats, biting the fingers off ICE agents.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, here's a question. Can things get so bad where a seat at the table isn't even desired? By which I mean, you have a class of people, let's say it's white guys, who feel that the system wants nothing to do with them, that the system hates them, and they're trying to replace them. That the system has made it clear that the future of the system relies on this one group being disenfranchised. Okay. And then you cause enough problems to get a seat at the table. Can a group be humiliated by the system so much that it wants nothing to do with negotiating with that system? Has that ever been the case? Do you think it's possible? Like some people can just be, even the leadership of the system can be unimpeachable because it's been made so clear that the system hates that group, and any invitation to the table can only be subversive. What do you think?
I think that very question is something that Sorel wrangles with in this text, is that once you do get a seat at the table, then the things that you were complaining about are sated because you got it, but the rest of the bourgeoisie, the rest of the proletariat don't. And that inevitably is what gets you hated. And this is what inevitably leads to a lot of revolutionary groups once they do get into power. You kill the guy that first got a seat at the table, right? Because he wants to hold on to his slice of the pie and doesn't want to, change or lose power or anything like that, right? We see this with Stalin. We saw this with Leninism. And we saw this with the millions of people that
Well, I think I see this with that Zoran Madmani guy, right? Like
I think he's the perfect example of a parliamentary socialist.
Yeah. Day two, he got in there. Here he comes, the anti-Zionist, third worldist leftist, and he's gonna stick it to Israel. And like day two, he's got like a tranny as a security advisor, and he's just with rabbis. It's like this was a guy who rode on a wave. I don't even care if you like him, but he very clearly rode on a wave that seemed to inspire a lot of right-wing people for a variety of reasons. And if just from a distance you're looking like, this guy's a fucking fraud. This guy's a sellout. He's a schemer. right? And then the most
And you
obvious
notice this a
thing-
lot with a lot of socialists on Twitter, where they're posting the "Fell for It Again" award meme on Ma'am Donnie. It's like, well, I wanted my violent revolution, and I wanted like actual heckin' anti-Zionism in the most Jewish city in America. Like you all fell for it again, and it's just like, you've spoiled me with those $7,000 checks. And it's just like, well, no. I mean, this again, it's the example of parliamentary democracy that I think that Sorel would know, but also like violent left wingers, at least for right now, like they've got it good because the state's on their side. Like, yeah, the American Communist Party can organize and do little trips to practice with rifles and whatnot. But I mean, at the same time, they know that once actual action is when someone tells them no, as we mentioned earlier in the chat, what's happened? Well, every right-wing quote-unquote intel or extremist guy has noted that, hey, all these John Brown Gun Club Signal and Telegram chats are all saying we should go to Minneapolis and be there, and the Hicklibs are armed, and they're all standing out there with their rifles, and even the Black Party, or the Black Panther Party, or the new Black Panther Party, because the OG one hates their pro-immigration stance, they're talking about being armed. And, you know, how much of that's for show remains to be seen when there has been violence used against them, whether with cars or other things. So I think that we're in a really interesting position to witness those questions being asked. Like on the left, I feel like they're ready to, the first person who says no, they want to kill. But for the right, I don't know, because there has not been a lot of right-wing violence that has done anything in a way that has led to substantial change, except to clamp down on regular white people.
No, I agree with that completely. I just wanted to note, you mentioned the Black Panther Party. The Black Panthers are the only black men in America you will never see fire their weapons. Like, if you see the Black Panther Party show up, it's almost as a way to inspire white people to fire their weapons, because they don't want the black people to get in trouble. So they will lay down their lives so that the Black Panthers never have to fire their fucking modded rifles. They're what do you call them? There's a name for guys who have too many attachments on their weapons. It should just make them look bigger. Tactical. These tactical Negroes. He's walking with the fucking.
Now that's a stream title.
Yeah, just walking around with too many night vision goggles. Fucking assholes. There's been a couple of interesting super chats here. Let me just. Someone had mentioned, do they even want white guys anymore? We were talking about the hypothetical of, I remember years ago they're talking about white strike. This idea of white strike, that every competent white man should leave their job. Well, this would be that. Okay, so hypothetically, every accomplished white guy leaves, and that it's in the interest of what? Hurting the system? Sure. Some people might say it's to have the system they'll miss us when we're gone. That's what they would say. So you get back to the table. So when we say that, it's that not that the system wants quote unquote anything to do with white people. It's that you cause so much havoc and so much of a problem, they're forced to reckon with you. So they don't need to like you, they don't need to want you, but they need to deal with you because you cause such a problem. That's the idea. But the question was, would these people ever trust the system? Would they want to do anything with that system? And then we got some speculation here about, I don't know if it's serious. They said they'll just make a special reparations tax for whites only. POC pay nothing. We pay everything. Sort of a modern monetary theory.
Well, you saw that a lot, too, with like the Kamala Harris campaign, where it was like white guys for Harris. Like they were all, and again, it's the answer for the Democratic coalition for like progressive whites was like, you can have a seat at the table. It's the cuck chair, but like I don't think that it's, for me at least. I said this actually at the Old Glory Club conference this last year. I said, when people say things will get so bad that eventually someone will just wake up, there are white Anglo libtards in South Africa that will side with Julius. Malema.
They have YouTube channels, guys. You can go watch them.
Yeah, they will do the apologia for Julius Malema and kill the boar. So no, things can get so bad that there will still be white libtards telling you that how does this affect you personally?
Okay, Sex Freakman with Tacticoons. There it is. We got Root. You don't got to touch
Ladies and
this
gentlemen, we got him.
one. You got to touch this one. I'm going to fall on this one. I'm going to put both arms around this and say it's mine.
That's fine.
I don't want to sully you with enjoying this.
This is the one show I really get to let loose on, and I appreciate it.
Can we talk about this motherfucker that we both know, named Gio Pinachetti? I look at the chat. What do I see? He's saying nothing the whole time. He pops up. Did you guys see Moist Critical? LOL. Gio, what the fuck are you talking about?
A Twitch drama streamer?
What in God's name are you talking about, Gio?
What? No. What society of spectacle bullshit is this? I'm not paying attention to some Twitch streamer being like, "Hey guys, this baseball situation, huh? The real bad drama." No.
Don't bring in another stream you're watching on another screen.
It's us, Twitch, and then the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's got 3 screens.
Here's Gio contributing though, pulling his weight.
There we go.
It's not that they would miss competent whites when they're gone. They would just
let
things get shoved, should go fast. And okay, and that was my position when it was brought up, saying that they'll invite you back. No, they will.
No.
Has that happened with the police? Like if every white cop walks off the force tomorrow, because I heard people advocate for that. You said you owe it to yourself as a white man to leave the police because the police are anti-white. Sure, okay, but then you leave, and then it's all just black women and Hispanic guys. Like I don't know what the next step is. Then you just don't have any white cops forever, right? Like it's someone explain. Other than you're hoping that I guess the police fall apart, or they don't. We call this Brazilification. We call this the process of everything just kind of gets worse and worse and worse, and then you die, and then nothing gets better ever. Which is there's a stronger historical case for that being the norm. You think things just bounce back, things get so bad, and then boing, then people rise up again. Or what happens is they get so bad and then they plateau for 400 years. After 2 generations, your descendants don't remember how it used to be, and this is just how it is. So that's what's on the line. Anyway, we're getting off topic a little bit here, but yeah, I don't think just abandoning what power you do have and increasing your own persecution leads to, Phoenix rising from the ashes just like that. It could. There could be a total collapse scenario, but what seems to be more likely is things just, I guess, Brazilify. And even if you don't know much about Brazil, you just don't. You don't want to be Brazilified. It just sounds bad, doesn't it? I know some ladies who could use a bit of Brazilification, if you know what I mean. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean.
Spoken like a 7-year itch.
I just see a comment here that just says Pete Quinones. What do you mean? What do you We love Pete Quinones, but
we like Pete. He's not here right now.
But why?
Why? But why male models?
We got for the whites that are done with the system. We're going our own way. We're returning to the land. And good. Hey, no comment there.
You will never hear either of us denigrate their efforts.
I think there should be more of it.
There should be.
I think when it comes to
any consolidation of political power is good.
When it comes to any right-wing action, because people are just involved in this constant knife fight and trying to figure out what should have priority over everything else. And my position has always been more and louder and faster and yesterday. Whatever it is, whatever group, just keep going. Have thousands of similar things. Nothing wrong there. I hope they succeed. I would hate to see them fail. I know in the past many have failed. Keep that in mind. I'm not saying that's going to happen now, but I hate to see it. We wish them well, and they say that non-sarcastically. Because I don't even know. I think it's hard to build a case against that. It's just guys being dudes. What's wrong? Why can't I buy some fucking land and build a house? Fuck you. That's very American. It's harder to make a case for that in Canada, because they'll sound American. They don't want you doing it up here. But it's really complicated to buy land up here too. It's easier in America.
Yeah, and also just there are a million different people trying a million different things on the right to see what succeeds, and it's very hard because there's no real money in this, and there's no real patronage at all whatsoever, and there's not going to be anyone that's going to support you when you fail, but people who will find any excuse to justify distancing themselves from you. We don't share the benefit of a lot of socialist revolutionaries where it's like, even if one guy falls on the sword, there are 20 more willing to take their place. That doesn't exist on the right, at least for right now. So, I mean, when anyone does anything that I think puts the conversation about freedom of association or the outright ethnic cleansing that this country has gone through, I'm all for them to try. I'm not going to... They're putting their life and money and their well-being on the line in a way that I'm not. So I have no place to be snarky about what they do.
I must once again bring it back to this friend of ours, Gio. Look at this. Some parts of Brazil sound good. I might move there. Come get your boy, Prude. He is out of pocket.
He is a grown-ass man. He is 33. He can do what he wants. He's...
Some part... What parts, Gio? Have a seat. Have a seat, Gio. What parts of Brazil sound good? Is it the parts where you get to run around? I mean, I don't even know anything about Brazil. I'm combining every global South country I can think of. I'm like, yeah, Brazil, they got gold AK-47s, and they do the necklacing, and I mean, the falafel's good, I hear. Just what? I guess that's the point. That could be the case. It's just all this stuff. They probably eat tacos there, right? Tacos and Church's chicken.
Could be worse.
I'm selling myself on. I'm like, man, I do like tacos. I do like Church's chicken.
You have fallen for the oldest libtard argument in the book. The food.
The food, yeah. I'm a true white man in the sense that I don't want to bring them here to have the restaurants. I want the food. I want to go there and cause a ruckus. I want to go there.
We need to retake the word tourist back from online internet discourse.
Take it back from women. There shouldn't be... It doesn't... You ever heard of a woman referred to as a tourist? It sounds disgusting. It sounds fake and fraudulent, doesn't it? That's not a feminine thing to be. Oh, I'm gonna walk around Asia. Shut up. Go to hell.
Oh my gosh.
Women... Excuse me, go to hell, all right? Tourism is for the fellas. It's for walking down the middle of an unpaved road drunk. And then there's kids pointing guns at you. I'm thinking of Lord of War again, aren't I?
You sure are. You just want to kill Jared Leto.
There's something about Lord of War that speaks to the soul of the white man. Having a little African boy point a gun at your face and then it misfires and you try and correct it because, man, you're in it. You're on it. You're on the wavelength, man. And then you're snorting cocaine mixed with gunpowder. Fuck, what a life. And now I get what Gio's talking about. Here's the thing. I think I just want to go to Africa. I want to go to Africa and die. How about you? He's about to get married, of course. Give it a few years and you'll be right where I am. You want to go snort gunpowder and die in Africa?
Oh boy.
Look, you're in the honeymoon period. You will be in the honeymoon period. That's a great period to be in. Soon, you want to do experiments on human bodies in a lighthouse. I'm telling you. What do you think the Friday night post is for? That's my experiment in the lighthouse. Hey, were you the first guy to do the Friday night post? Like that one with that? To be perfectly honest with you, I don't remember because I've been doing it for 3 years. I think I've seen some people appropriating that. That's fine. I've been doing the bit for a while. It's a sign. If people are doing their own versions of it, it's a sign that you've done something good. There was this interesting commentary on American violence that I thought was really interesting. This is later on. But he says, I borrow a second example from Paul de Rosières, who, like Paul Bureau, is a fervent Catholic and especially interested in questions of morality. He narrates how towards 1860, in the country of Denver, the great mining center of the Rocky Mountains, was cleared of bandits who infested it. The American magistracy, being impotent, courageous citizens, undertook the work.
Quote, lynch law was frequently put into operation. A man accused of murder or of theft might be arrested, condemned, and hanged in less than a quarter of an hour if an energetic vigilance committee could get a hold of him. The honest American has the excellent practice of not allowing himself to be crushed on the pretext that he is virtuous. A law-abiding man is not necessarily timid, as is often the case with us. On the contrary, he is convinced that his interests ought to be considered before those of the habitual criminal or of the gambler. Moreover, he possesses the necessary energy to resist in the kind of life he leads that makes him capable of resisting effectively, even taking the initiative and the responsibility of a serious step when the circumstances demand it. Such a man, placed in a new country full of natural resources, wishing to take advantage of the riches it contains in order to acquire a superior situation in life by his labor, will not hesitate to suppress, in the name of the higher interests he represents, the bandits who compromise the future of the country. That is why 25 years ago at Denver, so many corpses were dangling above the little wooden bridge thrown across Cherry Creek.
That is a great segment. I'm just looking at the time.
It goes
here.
incredibly hard.
Okay, so and then maybe we got time for like one or two more.
Yeah, sure.
Let me see here. And I'm also keeping an eye on the chat here. Women shouldn't be allowed to walk around in tight, revealing clothing. We shouldn't allow it. You know what?
I think I've heard this before. I'm getting something. White Sharia. Shut up.
I tell you what. You know, I don't mind the revealing clothing. I think, you know, this is an appreciation of physical beauty. Now, if we're talking fat people, I think that's
Ladies. Dress for the body you have, not the
Now-
body you want.
We're just going to start a shit posting segment. It's like, okay, everyone's got their plan of what they do with fat people. Everyone's got their plan of what they do. You know, like, okay, we know.
You don't?
It's genocide. We're gonna kill them all. We're gonna blow up the planet. Okay, yeah, okay. I get this. I think this is touching on something that has been expressed in the chat earlier. It says everything in war is carried out without hatred and without the spirit of revenge. In war, the vanquished are not killed. Non-combatants are not made to bear the consequences of the disappointments which the armies may have experienced in the field of battle. I think that's very optimistic. I think that's almost naive. But anyway, force is then displayed according to its own nature without ever professing to borrow anything from the judicial proceedings which society sets up against criminals. The more syndicalism develops by abandoning the old superstitions which come to it via the men of letters, professors of philosophy, and historians of the revolution, from the ancien regime and from the church, the more will social conflicts assume the character of simple struggle similar to those of armies on campaign. See, this is something we were talking about just before. It's and we've seen some comments in the chat saying like it seems to be a misunderstanding of what war is. So in one sense, he's saying all this conflict is part of like one proletarian war for liberty, which I think I disagree with. But then he's also saying that everything in a sense is war. And you hear that and you're like, okay, interesting. But I'm not sure I align with his definition of how war is conducted. It's like everything in war is carried out without hatred and without the spirit of revenge. I mean, that's not true. Not all, maybe some wars, maybe wars that are staffed more by mercenaries and whatnot, or simple territorial claims. But I think there's a great deal of hatred in war, especially if you're defending yourself against an aggressor. It's like, in war, the vanquished are not killed. I don't know what that means. Non-combatants are not made to bear the consequences of the disappointments which the armies may have experienced in the field of battle. I mean, that's not true at all. Like, how many vanquished nations have been humiliated, have been oppressed after. So it's like on one, and I think this, upon reading it again, I think this filters through the rest of his idea of the role of violence, because he's saying violence is always righteous. He hasn't said that outright, but you can kind of detect that in what he's saying. But I think you do need to understand that when these revolutions have been successful, every communist revolution was hideous. there were so many indignities visited upon different groups, and corpses were exhumed, corpses of nuns, and laughed at. The public executions, jeering crowds, cackling freaks, like it seems that the nature of violence is ugly, and it can get ugly. And I think, at least on our side of things, we're admitting that it's ugly, and it has a capacity to be extremely dehumanizing. Of course it does, but that's something that we have to reckon with. We have to be, we have to accept that. But I don't know. I get the sense that when he's talking about violence, the ugliness and the revenge and the desperation, that's absent. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that when we look at the revolutions that have succeeded on the left, the violent ones at least, you either topple the system completely, or you effectively get everything you want by people who are too terrified to put you down. In the left, in America, you had the Days of Rage. And if you look at a lot of the manifestos of these left-wingers at the time, you come to this really pants-shittingly sad conclusion that they virtually got everything that they wanted. Maybe with the exception of the abolition of prisons. But we almost got there in 2020. Because, again, parliamentary or democratic or our congressional system, it's like the congressional baseball game. Some guy, they didn't change anything. The Steve Scalise didn't go out of his way and say, actually, I think we should just start, lampposting all Bernie Sanders supporters that shot me. In the same way that you could have bombs go off in the Capitol, and you could have the zebra murders take place, but no one was like, maybe all of this social progressivism is a bad idea. No, the frog got boiled. And the same thing with the Spanish Civil War, the Soviet Revolution. That millions of people were killed. There's no doubt or question about that. We have pretty good documented evidence of what's come out from it. And so I think that there's no, but I mean, again, the question is what can you build yourself out of that? And I think what validates Sorel, a lot of this, in the call for myth and the call for a metaphysical purpose is, what did Stalin implement? He implemented the new Soviet man. He gave a, mythological and cosmological framing to the socialist system of the Soviet republics. And I think that there's something to that. To sort of maybe get towards the end of our discussion with Sorel, and there's a lot here we have not covered. There's so much to talk about. I'm probably going to be doing a lot of essay writing on this book alone for some time, because it raises some interesting and uncomfortable questions for the right. Because again, if the right is quote unquote in the revolutionary position because the state has supported and endorsed and given financial aid to left-wing terrorism and to left-wing groups, what does that mean for your side? And that poses some uncomfortable questions that you can't really say in the presence of a cell phone or polite company, right? Because then all of a sudden you get called an extremist, you get called a Fed poster, you get people knocking on your doors for tweets. Because we don't live in an era where I could go to a different coffee shop and have these conversations. I live in a digital panopticon in which having this conversation, I'm sure, is going to be a problem for somebody in the future.
Which is such a strange thing to consider when, I was saying this the other day in some rambling voicemail, but I'm not sure everyone agreed with this, but I think enough would, that, we find ourselves on this side of things politically because it's just so clear that the other side wants your dispossession, disenfranchisement, and even death. You're here because you hear this other side over here saying, we need to abolish whiteness, we need to abolish borders, the family is a patriarchal structure, just patently insane things. And so sometimes you're just shoved over here because you realize how ludicrous that is. But people are being brought to these conversations because you have this one group that says, we want to kill you. We want to kill you and mutilate your children's genitals and do all these wretched things. And what are you supposed to do? And saying no or saying that's wrong makes you an extremist. There's a lot of sensible people on this side who have been driven utterly mad by the worst part's the hypocrisy. of course. But really, how else can you like you said, we can't go to a third place and discuss how ludicrous it is that these people are getting away with saying these terrible things about us, saying, kill all white men and things like that. Things that they're trying to pretend they weren't saying for 15, 20 years. You'll notice that too. And try to gaslight you, and that as their best laid plans fail, that those were never their plans. In fact, those were your plans. I told people, watch out for this. They're gonna try and blame the entire trans phenomena on white women. They've already kind of started. So keep an eye out for that. And I don't know what to do, but that's going to be sad because there's a lot of white women who will accept that. And they'll just be left handing that hot potato, the hottest potato of all, a bomb. And then, as every other minority blames them for tricking their kids, and that's going to be used as another reason to visit violence upon them, as it already is. Anyway, I'm just looking at the chat now. Geez, okay, finally a Geo comment that's not talking about another video that he's watching. He says, the thing is the left says every day that the right wants to redact them, and every other outlet of popular media tells them that's true. That is true.
That's a basic observable fact, and Spaniel highlighted that in Bio-Leninism, where it's like, give me power so I can redact my enemies, because if you don't let me do that, we go back to 1950 and it's okay to be white.
Yeah. Like they want to make you, and this is an old idea, this is an old argument, I get that, but they're trying to make you seem extreme. And that's not to say that you should deny that. I think within the system you are extreme. Within this system you are treated as extreme for simple things such as the desire for self-determination for your group. That's it. So what are you going to do with that information? And I really do think, and we talked about this, I've seen this in the chat, that left-wing violence is it's less coherent. It lashes out a lot more. I really do think right-wing violence, when it emerges, is more kinetic, more targeted, more strategic. And it's not performative like that. I think that's why
when it does happen, it'll catch more or less everyone in this side of things off guard.
That's my true belief, and we're wading into dangerous waters here. But it's also, we're forecasting. I think I do think that is a firm possibility.
Because one of the things that, to conclude maybe on this discussion, but also some of the parts of Sorel here, in his section on the ethics of violence, Sorel points out quite clearly that one of the biggest things that holds back violence, or the response to suppress violence, is moralism, whether it be invented by the church, or be invented by liberals, or be invented by parliamentary officials. That, it's not good for us to do this. We have to rely on instead, these moral claims. And that, of course, when you're playing in a democratic system, you can often create very strange bedfellows who are desperate to not be calling for violence, or instead trying to be vying for power through the democratic system. And Sorel points out that Catholics have gone from being the source of monarchy to now being very much on the side of some of the very parliamentary socialists on the needs and the claims of the working class, and twisting the gospel to meet their needs for this point. And at the same time, when it comes to like the well-informed or the well-read upper classes who transition from violence to cunning, they tend to just break down into nasty knuckle fight dragouts, as we see in England, or more oftentimes it's just a way to release steam, such as English strikes. Whereas in Germans, oftentimes they're far more likely to be revolutionary, because they can claim and hold on to things that are metaphysical, whether it be the church, or whether it be the Reformation, or the fatherland. And for that, I think that you see a great deal of interest about violence overall, because now all of a sudden, violent action, whether it be left wing or right, has a unified cause in which people are willing to die for. And, for the longest time, the nation state had a pretty effective monopoly on those metaphysical claims for God, king, and country, or for God and country, or for your posterity. Well, it's hard to do that when those metaphysical items, which are very much organic, based upon the people who live in that land, so in this instance, white people, have been deprived of any sort of higher calling other than something that has been effectively secularized and put away privately on Sundays that's not publicly preached, and has been told that this country isn't for you. And even for the people in England, apparently, according to some, fucking report in some gay ass journal, apparently Shakespeare's now a black Jewish woman. So you can't have shit in Detroit.
I thought before it was just 12 different people. That now it's a black Jewish woman.
Now it's just a black Jewish woman.
And it's like, sure, okay. You know what? Like we're so far off the reservation. I hear that and go, yeah, probably, sure. Why not? Why not? Let's do that.
Slice another cigarette. Interesting.
Yeah, basically.
That's crazy.
I want to address this question here because I think this is a good question to gather up everything we're talking about here. From Sex Freakman, he says, is it possible to filter for people who do not need to have these abstract convos about violence? Like, are such circumstances ever viable? Well,
the answer, my hot take on that question is yes, but you're never going to hear me have that. My answer to that, I don't think I can adequately express on this stream.
But that is very similar to my answer, which is that it wouldn't need to be explained on a stream. So one interesting thing that we always talk about on Blood Satellite, even, it's that, and I've said this for quite a few years, I do believe it, it's that, a group of 5 guys who are in a proper organized group, they can basically do anything. So they could be a militia, or they could build a house, or they could, help their community. They could basically define a community if they wanted to. So that is the answer to that question. And what leaders do those groups accumulate around? And I think we have a better sense of how to accomplish that because we're not so beholden to these theoretical flights of fancy about collectivism, that your leader is someone that must be voted on. We're a bit more, not perennial, but we believe that great men are called forth from their circumstances. And you mentioned De Maistre earlier, and this was what I always bring this up, and I should probably shut the fuck up about it, but it's that there's a proximal zone of sovereignty. There's no sovereign. There's a zone of sovereignty that is occupied by a person, sort of called forth from history, called forth not even from the people he's not voted in. It's just he emerges. Like Napoleon emerged, Alexander emerged, other people emerged, and they don't really have a lot in common otherwise, not physiologically, not even ideologically, not anything. But so we understand that the filter tends to be leadership, in my view, that leaders of men they live and die by their competency. So you can have a work group or a basic assumption group. You can have cults of personality, but these tend to reveal themselves, and these leaders are often consumed by their groups. But if we're wondering, back to the question, how do you filter for people who can, in other words, take action? Well, there is no system for that. You wouldn't even, like as Prude said, need to discuss that on a show. It seems to me that after people, especially in this space that we're in right now, they've listened to enough things. Maybe they've read enough books, heard enough podcasts, watched enough videos, been in enough group chats that they know where they stand on every issue. They're exhausted by the discourse and they say, what now? Many people are at that point now. Some people burn out entirely, they wash right out. Then others will look for kind of what you're looking for now. People who want to be filtered, people who need to do something about their circumstances, and usually there's outlets for that. There's groups doing that right now. We've talked about a couple on the stream so far, but then there's others, and I think really that the filter is the leadership, and the filter is the ability to execute projects and actually do things. Like it sounds counterintuitive in a sense, but the filter for doing things is the capacity to do things. There really is no other filter. You actually just need to go do things. And then those people, those men of action tend to, congregate in so many ways. But then there's the wrong way to go about it, which is just to elect yourself as some sort of lord, some petty lord, and then hope that people just gather around you. I've seen that happen. That's how you get content plantations, among other things. So I hope that is an answer for the question. But these people, they we tend to believe there's more bigger forces at work that sort of drive people into these areas. If you're the type of person who desires something like that, you will probably find yourself in those circumstances. You'll probably be trying to make connections to people. You'll try to form a group. These other things. Anyway, this has been a long answer.
Yeah, and I agree with your answer wholeheartedly. There were a couple of other super chats that came in. A few people had became channel members, so thank you for your ongoing monthly contribution to the work that I do. I like these names of thinking of a new name. That's always a really good way to tell me that you're getting original. And then Clarence Thomas 777. Well, thank you for joining the onto the show. Greatly appreciate it. What a great name. Well, I'm a fan. And then Not Grim says this is what the quote-unquote Giga Longhouse Ultra Favela means. And I think that's a reference to what Gio was talking about Brazil earlier.
Yeah, I saw when that came up. Yeah, I was talking about Brazil, basically.
Yeah.
I always say Brazil just because that's the one at hand. It might apply to other South American countries too. I really don't know what's going on down there. I take a lot of this from playing Max Payne 3. Or watching Man on Fire.
Worse. It could be worse.
Oh, Machiavelli. So some of those. YouTube doesn't allow me to super chat.
That's unfortunate.
One question here: has lone wolves ever accomplished anything? I'm outside of mass shootings. No. Or like very lone terrorists. I mean, lone. We've seen lone wolf violence recently.
I was about to say. I mean, Luigi Mangione is an example of that. The guy who killed Charlie Kirk, but he technically wasn't lone wolf.
You'll see assassinations. You'll see. I mean, you see trannies shooting up schools. Like, but that's I think it could only.
But
be
I don't.
Just...
But those aren't. I don't think those fit any definition of like lone wolf terroristic actions. I mean that because they're ideologically motivated by something that is popular, and most of the time they have communication with people who are like-minded.
Yeah, I mean,
it'd be very different. I mean, I think that I don't know if it accomplishes anything, but I think that you would know damn well a difference between a Luigi Mangione character or if someone on the right just said screw it and decided to go do something in Minneapolis. Which I'm not. This is not advocacy in any way, shape, or form. But there would be a noticeable difference in the response. So whatever it accomplishes, it will inevitably hurt the right more than it hurts the left.
Yeah, I mean,
because no one on the right wants to be the first guy over the trench.
Yeah, and we've seen this happen. There have been examples of exactly what we're talking about. On the far right, they call them the Saints. These would be like the Brendan Tarrants. Like you've seen far right massacres that, as far as I know, were just them. I mean, depending on how conspiratorial you want to get about it, you could say that there's no such thing as a lone wolf attack ever. It's all coordinated by the CIA. I don't think I subscribe to that, but that's what you will hear. Or, like the Riddler and the Batman, you've got your group chat of people who are coordinating with secretly. But, I really do think there are lone wolf attacks, but, yeah, I guess that's the answer to that. But it's debatable how successful they are. It's debatable whether it helps the cause, I guess. Other than just, if you're an accelerationist, sure. If you're an accelerationist, you just want people to be scared and upset all the time. Yeah, mission accomplished then.
Yeah.
Well, he's saying it was a historical question. I don't know. Okay, fuck.
Well, maybe a good point to wrap it up. Did we pick a book that we're going to do for March?
Yes. I want to do part 1 of what I assume will be at least a 2-parter. Most likely, I don't want to do 3-parters anymore. If we can
No. We learned our lesson from Spinal Catastrophism.
I want to... What a good one for 3 parts, though.
I told this to Ben Boyce. I said, when right-wingers cover leftist literature, no one... The publishers are happy because they're like, oh, thank God someone's actually reading this bullshit.
Yeah, and there's been a couple. I don't want to. I want to see the book sales for Anti-Memetics after we covered it. I
want to see the Spinal Catastrophism sales after we covered it.
Look, I
want to see how many of you guys drove the price up of what went wrong, the creation and the collapse of the Black Jewish Alliance after I published the video.
For the next book, I really want to do The Transformation of the World by Osterhammel, which is a very, very long book, but it's a global history of the 19th century. And some people I respect very deeply have reviewed this book, and they would spend months dissecting it. It's a very dense book. It's just over 1,000 pages. I'm a few hundred pages in. It's really, really fascinating. We could it's going to be very difficult finding a conceptual through line or trying to fit everything you want to fit into it. That's why I was even thinking like 3 episodes, but I think you're really going to like it if you haven't started it yet. But to that point, you're taking February off, I think is what you said.
Yeah, February's not going to have any live shows. I get married next month, and I have a lot of paid content that people want me to put out, so I'm going to spend February putting that out. There's going to be a book review, some video stuff, and I just recently got paid a shit ton of money to go do a Code Geass review, so that'll be a DA special back in March. But Dime's the type of guy who thinks down under means South America. It is if you're interested in cosmetic surgery.
I was trying to think of like a Brazilian with an Australian accent. But again, I don't know enough about these people. I can do the accent, but I don't know what they would say. Oh, crikey, I want a fucking taco. Oh,
I don't.
God. I know I'm fucking gay. That's what they say in Brazil. I know it's me, Joe fucking Davis. I'm Brazilian now. Geo longs for the Longhouse, absolutely.
I just think I just imagine it to be something like this.
You got so many cool props over there. You haven't even.
I
used
literally just pulled out my phone and looked for monkey stock noise.
Okay, dude, I thought you.
I need to get a soundboard. You know, I should have put. That's my dumbass mistake. I should have put like recording equipment and like soundboard shit on my wedding registry. It's too late. Oh well.
I was so excited. I thought you had a yak back with a monkey noise preloaded.
I should. How much does that cost me?
A yak back. I mean, here's how fucking stupid I am. I think I looked.
Oh
that
my
up.
god, one of those on eBay. How much are they running for right now?
Just buy a new one. They must be manufacturing them. That was useless.
$39 on eBay. What the fuck?
There's the yak back's still around. It's still a viable company. And the entire marketing department's just a man in a fucking walking freezer, just having the worst life.
The benefits.
I. Just suffering man. Geo. Oh, okay.
Geo, you could have your own soundboard, and I could do an entire digital archipelago episode without you being there live. Just using recorded bits of you as a soundboard. As an experiment, if some lovely chatter wants to give me 50 sound clips of Gio Penichetti throughout the years, I will make a DA episode, and I won't tell you that it's not that he's not there, and I'm just gonna do an entire DA episode solo. Using Geo sound clips as his response.
Geo brings his own soundboard and it's just porn sounds. It's just really uncomfortable.
Hey man, that's the B side of the Beach Boys. Will you calm? Lower your fucking voice.
What would it be on a Geo soundboard? Oh fuck, we should have opened with this. We gotta get going now. We can make a meal out of this if we wanted to.
I can make a meal out of it tomorrow when the Digital Archipelago is live at 8 p.m. Eastern tomorrow evening on Tuesday.
You guys better tune in. Better tune in or drop out. And you know what? We're doing a live episode this week too, Blood Satellite. I haven't even announced it yet on a Thursday. I don't know what we're talking about. I do not have much planned for it. I feel like I want to talk about Alberta separatism, but...
Finally, a tism I can get into.
Must we? We gotta do anything. Let's just talk about the new Fallout sucks. Let's just do all anyone wants is movie
Takes
reviews.
from 2015. The new Fallout sucks.
Takes from 2015. It's 2015 and the Fallout sucks. It's 2009 and Fallout sucks.
It's 2026 and Fallout sucks.
Geo's got a big fan here. The reeks of My Life for Geo. That makes me highly uncomfortable. I don't like Geo having slaves like this.
He's got shooters, man. Charlie Mackey sends a very generous $25. He says, "Good evening. I hope that you are both well. Hopefully, I can listen back to this while I work into the morning hours." Well, it sucks that you have the night shift, Mr. Mackey, but thank you so much for that generous donation.
Geo says Geo AI. He's on board the idea.
Oh man, Grok it to me.
What would be called? I'm trying to think of something that's not too insulting, but uses the word
Geo-AI.
GAI, so gay. There, we got it. Let's get going. All right.
And cut!